See, Vernon Slade didn't knock. He never knocked. He shoved open the door of Ironwood Ranch's main house like he already owned it, because in his mind he already did. See, he looked at the woman standing in the kitchen, flour on her hands, 2 children pressed against her sides, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he's already counted his money. See, tell Rourke his time's up, Slade said. I'll be back with papers before the snow hits. See, and he pointed one thick finger directly at Clara's face. You better pack whatever you dragged in here. See, because come winter, there won't be a roof left over your head worth standing under. See, Maisie grabbed Clara's apron. Elias went rigid beside her. See, Clara didn't move, didn't blink. She just looked at that finger and made a decision that would change everything. See, if you've ever stood in a doorway with nothing behind you and nowhere left to go, you already know what Clara Whitlock felt that morning. See, and if you've ever watched someone try to take the last thing you had, you already know what she did next. See, stay with this story until the very end. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what happens next because the stories we tell here don't end the way powerful men plan them to. See, hit the like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. See, I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it really began. See, the road into Red Hollow wasn't much of a road. See, it was more like an old argument between wagon wheels and frozen mud, a series of ruts and patches of gravel that eventually gave up trying to be anything useful and just sort of petered out at the edge of town. See, Clara Whitlock had been following that road for 2 days. See, 2 days of walking because the horse they'd started with had gone lame outside of Cutter's Creek, and they'd had to leave it with a farmer who at least gave them a jar of pickled beets and a half loaf of bread in exchange. See, Elias carried the beets. Maisie carried nothing except herself, and by the second afternoon she wasn't carrying that very well either. See, Mama, Maisie said. She didn't say anything after it. See, she didn't have to. I know, Clara said. Keep walking. See, the trunk was on a borrowed handcart, borrowed being a generous word for something Clara had found abandoned behind a feed store in Cutter's Creek and simply taken because she had nothing left to be ashamed about. See, the trunk held 3 changes of clothes between the 3 of them, a cast iron skillet, her late husband's ledger book that she'd kept for reasons she couldn't fully explain, a small tin of salt. See, and a Bible her mother had given her that she hadn't opened since Thomas died. See, that was everything. That was all that remained of the life she'd spent 11 years building. See, the farm outside Millhaven was gone, not lost gun. See, when a man owes more than a farm is worth and the bank decides it's done waiting, they don't give you a gentle conversation. See, they give you a date. Then they give you a marshal. See, then they stand on your porch with their arms folded while you carry your children's things out to the yard and figure out where on earth you're supposed to go next. See, Clara had not cried in front of the marshal. She had not cried in front of the bankman. See, she had not cried in front of the neighbor women who stood across the road watching with that particular expression, half pity, half relief that it wasn't them. See, she had cried later, alone, with her face pressed into the blanket she'd packed for Maisie, and then she had stopped because there was no one else to get the children fed. See, Red Hollow was the end of the list. She'd had a list of places cousins, old acquaintances, a woman Thomas had known from before the war, and one by one, each name had turned into a letter of polite refusal or simply silence. See, Red Hollow was the name Thomas had mentioned once, years ago, as a place where a man could still start over if he had the stomach for it. See, Thomas didn't have the stomach for much by the end. See, but Clara had held on to the name anyway. They walked into Red Hollow just before noon on a Wednesday in March, when the spring hadn't decided yet whether it was coming. See, the main street was maybe 4 blocks of storefronts, a church, a livery, and a scattering of houses behind them. See, a few men on the steps of the general store watched the 3 of them come in, a woman in a coat that had been mended so many times the patches had patches, a teenage boy with his jaw set like he was trying to look older than he was. See, and a little girl who was past the age of crying but hadn't yet gotten to the age of hiding it. See, Clara walked to the general store. She asked the man behind the counter if he knew of any work in town. See, he looked her over the way men did when they were calculating something. See, what kind of work? Any kind. He shook his head slowly. See, said the mill wasn't hiring. The hotel had a woman already, and the school teacher position had been filled in January. See, she asked if he knew of any ranches that might need help. See, he went quiet for a moment. Then he said, only place that might take on extra hands is Ironwood, but I wouldn't. He stopped himself. See, looked at the children. Gideon Rourke runs it. East Road, about 4 miles out. See, but ma'am, I'll be honest with you, that place is in a bad way. See, how bad? Bad enough that most folks around here expect it to fold before summer. See, Clara thanked him and asked if she could leave the handcart and trunk by his back step while she walked out. See, he said yes. He also slipped a paper bag across the counter and said it had been sitting there a while and was going to go stale. See, it was hardtack biscuits. Clara took them without argument. See, the 4-mile walk east took most of the afternoon because Maisie's feet had blistered 2 days ago, and every mile now was a negotiation. See, Elias offered to carry her twice. Maisie refused twice because at 9 years old she had inherited exactly enough of her mother's pride to make things harder on herself. See, Clara watched her daughter's face and said nothing about it. See, some things you don't talk a child out of, you just walk beside them. See, the gate to Ironwood was made of old timber that had gone gray from weather, and one side of it hung at an angle like it had given up trying to be vertical. See, a hand-painted sign above it said Ironwood Ranch in letters that had once been black and were now closer to the color of old ash. See, Clara stood at that gate for a moment. Behind her, 4 miles of hard road. See, behind that, a town where nobody had work. Behind that, a string of closed doors stretching all the way back to the farm that wasn't theirs anymore. See, she opened the gate and walked through. The ranch house was a 2-story structure that had once been something someone was proud of. You could tell by the bones of it. See, the covered porch still had its original posts, though the floorboards had gone soft in 2 places. See, the windows were intact. There was smoke coming from the chimney, which meant someone was home and had wood, which already made it better than 3 places Clara had asked at before this. See, she knocked. The man who opened the door looked like someone who'd been fighting something for a long time and wasn't sure anymore if he was winning. See, he was taller than she had expected, with a beard that had grown past the point of being intentional and dark eyes that took her in quickly and without particular welcome. See, he looked over her shoulder at Elias and Maisie, and something in his expression shifted slightly. See, not softened exactly, more like recalculated. Mr. See, Rourke, Clara said. That's me. My name is Clara Whitlock. See, I was told in town you might need help. He looked at her for a long moment. See, who told you that? Man at the general store. Gideon Rourke said nothing for a moment. See, he looked at the children again. Maisie was standing very still, with her hands clasped in front of her, doing the thing she did when she was trying very hard not to look as tired as she was. See, Elias had his chin up, which Clara recognized as his version of the same thing. See, I can't pay wages, Gideon said. I'm not asking for wages. See, then what are you asking for? Clara looked him directly in the eye. See, food and a roof. For me and my children. In exchange, I'll work. See, I can cook, clean, keep accounts, mend clothes, do a garden, preserve food, and my son is 13 and a hard worker. See, we won't eat more than we earn, and we won't cause you trouble. See, Gideon's jaw moved slightly, like he was working on something behind his teeth. See, he looked at Maisie one more time specifically at her shoes, which Clara knew were too small and had been splitting at the left sole for 2 weeks. See, he stepped back from the door. Come in then, he said. See, and that was it. No great speech, no promises, just a man stepping back from a door. See, Clara walked her children inside. The interior of the house told the story without needing to be asked. See, it wasn't filthy, but it had the specific kind of disorder that comes from a man managing things alone that were meant for 2 people. See, dishes stacked in a particular way that meant function, not habit. See, a pile of mended harness leather on the kitchen table that had clearly been there long enough to become invisible. See, two pairs of children's boots by the back door smaller than Elias's, larger than Maisie's. See, you have children, Clara said. 2. Boys 11, girls 8. See, they're out with the hands right now. He said it with a kind of flatness that wasn't unfriendly, just factual. See, like he'd learned to say things without extra weight on them. See, he showed her the room she and Maisie would share small, with a narrow bed and a pallet he said he'd find another blanket for. See, Elias would sleep in the room with his son. He said it like he expected her to have an objection. See, she didn't. Can I see the kitchen? Clara asked. He showed her. See, she opened the larder. She stood there for a moment and just looked. See, it wasn't empty, but it was close enough to empty that a woman who knew what she was looking at could see the problem clearly. See, enough flour for maybe 3 weeks. Some salt pork. See, a small amount of dried beans. Cornmeal running low. See, 3 jars of something preserved that had no labels. See, she turned around. Gideon was watching her with his arms crossed, not defensively, more like he was waiting to see what she was going to say. See, how many people are you feeding total? She asked. See, 7. See, my 2. See, your 3. See, and one hand who sleeps in the bunk. See, second hand quit last month. All right, Clara said. See, she closed the larder. I'll need to take stock of what you have in the barn and the root cellar too before I can plan meals properly. See, Gideon blinked. You want to take stock of the barn? See, I want to know what we have to work with. Yes. He looked at her for another one of those long moments. See, then he said, there's a root cellar behind the house. See, key's on the hook by the back door. She nodded. She would have asked for the key if he hadn't offered it. See, that first evening, Clara cooked with what was on hand-stretched beans, with a piece of the salt pork and cornbread that used more flour than she would have liked, but that the children needed something substantial after days of near-nothing. See, she set the table for 7. See, she had not met Gideon's children yet, but when they came in from the barn with the remaining ranch hand, a wiry man named Pete who said about 4 words all through supper and seemed to consider that generous, she saw them clearly enough. See, Gideon's son was named Owen. He was 11, with his father's dark eyes and a careful way of watching things before he committed to an expression. See, his daughter was named Ruth, 8 years old with a gap in her front teeth and a manner that said she'd been the woman of the house for longer than an 8-year-old should have been. See, Ruth looked at Maisie across the table. Maisie looked back. See, after a moment, Ruth passed the cornbread without being asked. See, it wasn't much, but Clara noticed it. See, after supper, after the children were in their rooms and Pete had gone to the bunkhouse, and Gideon was sitting at the kitchen table with what she now recognized as the ranch account ledger, Clara washed the dishes. See, alone, she could hear the scratch of Gideon's pencil and the occasional silence where he stopped writing entirely. See, how far behind are you? She asked, without turning around. See, the pencil stopped. Beg your pardon? On the debt. See, how far behind are you? A pause. That's not your concern, Mrs. See, Whitlock. It is if I'm going to help you keep this place running, she said. See, I'm not asking to manage your finances. I'm asking to understand the situation so I know what we're actually dealing with. See, another pause. Longer this time. 7 months behind on the note to Slade, Gideon said. See, and he's not a patient man. Clara set down the dish she was drying. See, she turned around. Who is Slade? Gideon's expression did something complicated. See, Vernon Slade. He's the biggest cattle broker in the territory. See, holds paper on half the ranches in the county, including mine. He said it the way people say things they've said many times before, with the resignation of someone who'd gotten used to a weight. See, he buys cattle. See, he controls the weights. See, he sets the price. See, and if you owe him money, see, he sets the terms too. See, Clara looked at him carefully, and what are his terms? See, full repayment by December, or he takes the property. See, December. That was 9 months away, or it was supposed to be. See, she would not find out until later that Slade had already decided to change those terms. See, But that evening, she only knew what Gideon had told her. See, she went to bed in the narrow room with Maisie tucked against her side, listening to the wind come in through a gap under the window that she made a mental note to address in the morning. See, Maisie was asleep within minutes. Clara lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking. See, the larder was nearly empty. The debt was deep. The man who held the note was powerful. See, the ranch was bleeding from a dozen directions at once. See, and she had walked into the middle of it with 2 children, a cast iron skillet, and approximately 63 cents. See, she had been in hard situations before. She had never been in one quite like this. See, but the thing about Clara Whitlock, the thing that the people in Red Hollow would eventually come to understand, was that she didn't look at a hard situation and see all the ways it could go wrong. See, she looked at it and started making a list. The morning came gray and cold. See, Clara was up before anyone else, moving quietly through the kitchen, assessing. See, she found an egg basket near the back door and went to the chicken coop before the household was awake. See, 6 hens. Not enough, but something. She found the root cellar and took actual stock of it, this time methodically, the way her father had taught her. See, the way she'd been doing it on her own farm since Thomas started getting sick, and she'd had to learn to make small things last longer than they should. See, when Gideon came downstairs and found breakfast on the table, eggs, what remained of yesterday's cornbread toasted in the pan, see, and a weak but genuine cup of coffee, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. See, you didn't have to sit down, she said, while it's warm. See, he sat down. Owen and Ruth came down next. Then Elias, who'd slept better than he had in weeks, and had the slightly disoriented look of a boy who didn't know what to do with that yet. See, Maisie came last, hair tangled, dragging her blanket, and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway when she saw Ruth already at the table. See, Ruth looked up from her eggs. You can sit here, Ruth said, and pointed to the spot beside her. See, Maisie sat down. That was the beginning of that. After breakfast, while the children were sent on their separate morning tasks, Clara found Gideon near the barn. See, he was repairing a section of tack that had split, doing it badly. She noticed using the wrong kind of stitch for leather under stress. See, she did not say anything about the stitch. She said, I need to understand how the cattle operation works. See, what you sell, who you sell to, and how Slade is involved. See, Gideon stopped what he was doing and looked at her. See, you've been here one night, I know, Mrs. Whitlock. See, Clara. He paused. Clara, this isn't I appreciate what you're doing. See, the breakfast, I appreciate it. But the ranch business isn't something I need help with. See, she looked at him steadily. How's the current approach working? See, he didn't answer. I don't mean that as an insult, she said. See, I mean it as an honest question. Because from what I can see, you've been working yourself into the ground, and things are still getting worse. See, which means either you're doing the wrong things, or someone is working against you. See, either way, an extra set of eyes won't hurt. He stared at her. See, then he went back to the tack repair, using the same wrong stitch. See, you're stitching that backwards, she said. It'll split again in a month. See, he stopped, looked at the leather, said nothing. She went back inside and started organizing the kitchen the way it needed to be organized. See, that was day 2. What she could not know, what none of them knew, was that 3 miles away in town, Vernon Slade was sitting in his office above the livestock exchange, reading a letter from his lawyer and making a different kind of plan. See, one that had nothing to do with patients, and one that would arrive at Ironwood's door much sooner than December. See, 3 days after Clara Whitlock walked through Ironwood's broken gate, she found the account ledgers. See, not because Gideon showed them to her. He hadn't offered and she hadn't asked again, not directly. See, she found them the way she found most things in that house, by being the one who cleaned up after everyone else had stopped looking. See, they were in a wooden crate under the desk in what Gideon called his office, which was really just a corner of the front room sectioned off by a bookshelf that leaned 12 degrees to the left. See, 3 ledgers, each one covering 2 years of ranch operations. See, She'd been reorganizing the desk. Gideon had asked her to dust, and dusting without organizing was something Clara had never quite managed. When her hand found the edge of the crate and she pulled it out. See, she told herself she'd just look at the covers. 2 hours later, she was still sitting on the floor with all 3 books open, and the particular cold feeling in her chest wasn't from the draft under the door. See, the numbers didn't add up, not in the small, careless way that happens when a man isn't good with figures. See, they didn't add up in a way that had a shape to it, a pattern that repeated itself over and over, always in the same direction, always against Ironwood. See, cattle sold at weights that were lower than what the ranch's own notes recorded. See, payments credited weeks late, with interest compounding in the gap. See, fees for services Clara had never heard of, written in the margins in different ink than the rest. See, she sat with those books until her back ached from the cold floor, and then she sat a little longer. See, she was still sitting there when Gideon came in from the barn. See, he stopped in the doorway, looked at her on the floor. See, looked at the books. His expression went through several things in about 2 seconds, ending somewhere around resignation. See, those are private, he said, but he didn't say it with much force. See, I know. Clara looked up at him. When did you start selling to Slade? See, he came into the room slowly, like a man approaching something he'd been avoiding for a long time. See, 4 years ago, after my wife passed, he offered good prices at the start. See, and the weights? Do you have your own records of what cattle you brought to sale? See, Gideon sat down heavily in the desk chair. He reached into a drawer she hadn't opened yet and pulled out a smaller notebook worn, the cover soft from handling. See, he held it for a moment before he handed it to her. See, I keep my own counts, always have. She took the notebook and opened it alongside the ledger. See, it took her about 90 seconds to find the first discrepancy. See, she turned the book so he could see it, pointing at 2 lines. His number and Slade's number for the same sale, same date, different weight by 80 pounds. See, 80 pounds, she said. Gideon stared at the page. See, could be a recording error. She turned to the next page. See, pointed again, 60 pounds, then 3 pages later, 90. See, then back to the ledger, the late payment notation, the interest calculation that was 2% higher than the rate written on the original note agreement she'd also found in the crate. See, how many recording errors does it take before it stops being an error? She said. See, Gideon said nothing for a long time. The fire in the small hearth had burned down to a low pulse, and neither of them moved to add wood. See, outside, she could hear Elias and Owen doing something near the fence line, the occasional metal clang of tools, Owen's voice giving directions because apparently he'd already decided Elias needed directing. See, and Elias tolerating it with more patience than Clara would have expected from him. See, I've suspected, Gideon said finally. The words came out like he'd been holding them under pressure for so long they'd gone flat. See, for about 2 years I've suspected, but Slade holds my note. See, and I have no proof, and he has lawyers, and he gestured at the room around him, at the leaning bookshelf, at the general air of a house held together by stubbornness and not much else. See, you have records, Clara said. Your own records. See, and his records, and they don't match. That's not proof. See, that's 2 sets of numbers. It's a start. Gideon looked at her. See, Clara, I appreciate I appreciate what you're trying to do. See, but Slade has been running this county for 15 years. See, he owns the livestock exchange. He controls the transport contracts. See, half the ranchers in the territory are in debt to him. See, going up against him isn't something a person survives doing. See, has anyone tried? He opened his mouth, closed it. See, Harlan Betts tried 3 years ago, lost his ranch inside of 6 months. See, they said it was the drought. Was it? Gideon looked away. See, I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. Clara closed the ledgers carefully and stacked them on the desk. See, she put his personal notebook on top of them. I'm not saying we go to him tomorrow and accuse him of anything. See, I'm saying that someone should be documenting this properly. See, not just your tallies against his date by date, transaction by transaction, with anything else that can be corroborated. See, receipts, witness accounts, anything. Gideon rubbed his face with both hands. See, it was the gesture of a man who was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. See, why, he said, not argumentatively, genuinely, why does it matter to you? You've been here 3 days. See, Clara considered how to answer that honestly. Because my children are sleeping in this house, she said. See, and I need it to still be standing in 6 months. See, that was the practical answer. It was also true. What she didn't say was the other part, that sitting on that floor with those ledgers, she'd recognized something. See, not the numbers, but the feeling behind them. The feeling of something being slowly, methodically taken from a person who didn't see the full shape of it until it was almost too late. See, she'd felt that herself in the last year of managing the farm alone while Thomas was sick. See, the way problems compounded, the way a person could work harder and harder and still fall further behind if the ground itself was tilted against them. See, she knew what that felt like from the inside. She wasn't going to watch someone else drown in it if she could help it. See, she began keeping her own records that same evening. See, the work itself was straightforward. Clara had kept her own farm's accounts for 7 years and had a natural facility with figures that her school teacher father had cultivated in her as a girl, somewhat to the confusion of everyone around her. See, since a woman with a head for numbers in 1882 was considered either impressive or suspicious, depending on who you asked. See, she started a new notebook, fresh pages, and began transferring the discrepancies she'd found into a clean, organized format. See, date. Gideon's recorded weight. Slade's recorded weight. See, difference. Dollar value of difference at the agreed price per pound. See, the numbers, lined up that way, stopped looking like possible errors. See, they looked deliberate. They looked like a plan. Meanwhile, Ironwood itself was demanding attention from every direction at once, and Clara quickly discovered that the house had been running at the bare edge of functional for a long time. See, the kitchen garden had not been planted the previous spring. There'd been no time or no one who took it on. See, the root cellar had a drainage problem that had ruined a portion of a winter's worth of stored vegetables. See, the hens weren't laying at capacity because they were underfed, and their coop had a gap that let the cold in. See, these were all fixable problems. Clara was good at fixable problems. See, she started with the kitchen garden because it was almost too late in the season already, and another week would make it genuinely too late. See, she found seeds in the back of a shelf, some of them old enough to have questionable viability, but she planted them anyway because old seeds were better than no seeds. See, Elias helped her turn the ground. He'd grown up on a farm, and his body remembered the work even if his head wasn't always present for it. See, he was quiet in a way that worried her sometimes. Not sullen Elias wasn't a sullen boy, but carrying something. See, she'd noticed it on the road, and she noticed it here, in the set of his shoulders when he thought she wasn't looking. See, one morning. See, working beside her in the garden. See, he said without preamble. See, Owen says this place is going to fold. See, Clara kept digging. Owen's 11. He said his father told him. See, that it probably won't make it through the year. She stopped digging then and looked at her son. See, at the angle of his jaw, at the work-roughened hands that should have been a boy's hands, but weren't anymore. Hadn't been since the last year at the farm. See, what do you think? She asked. He shrugged. Not carelessly, it was the shrug of someone who didn't want to seem like it mattered as much as it did. See, I think you're already fixing things. I am, she said. See, so don't borrow the trouble yet. He went back to digging. See, she went back to digging. 3 days later, the first seeds were in the ground. See, the hens started laying better inside of 2 weeks, once Clara closed the gap in the coop and adjusted their feed. See, 6 hens became a reliable enough source of eggs that she could eat what was needed and still have a small surplus. See, she found a woman in town, a Mrs. Halverson, who ran a small boarding house, who would buy eggs and preserved goods regularly if Clara could produce them consistently. See, it wasn't much money, but it was money that didn't exist before. See, she found a second buyer for butter when she learned that Gideon had 3 milk cows whose output was being used inconsistently. See, By regulating the milking schedule and making butter from the surplus, she created a second small stream of income. See, when she told Gideon about it, he looked at her like she'd produced something from thin air. See, that's not nothing, he said, looking at the coins she'd laid on the kitchen table after her second trip to town. See, no, she agreed, it's not nothing. I didn't think about the butter. See, you had other things to think about. He picked up one of the coins and turned it over. See, put it back down. There should be more cows, he said. See, there were 2 years ago. I had to sell down the herd to make payments. See, how many cattle do you have now? 38 head. See, was 63 before. She did the math quickly. See, 25 head sold to make payments that, based on what she'd been finding in the ledgers, were likely inflated beyond what was legitimately owed. See, I want to look at the original note agreement, she said. See, the one you signed with Slade. Gideon looked up at her. See, something crossed his face, not resistance, but the expression of a man who'd been avoiding a specific drawer for a while. See, why? Because I want to understand exactly what it says versus how it's being applied. See, the note was in a tin box on the top shelf of the lean-to he used as a secondary storage room behind a broken lantern and 2 coils of old rope. See, he retrieved it without comment and handed it to her without looking at it himself, which told her he either knew what she'd find or was afraid to look. See, she read it at the kitchen table that evening after supper, while Gideon sat across from her doing what he usually did in the evenings, tending to small equipment repairs, the kind of work his hands could do while his mind was somewhere else entirely. See, the interest rate in the original agreement was 4%. See, the rate being applied in the recent ledger entries was 6. See, the difference seemed small until you calculated it across the size of the loan, across 7 months of compounding. See, Gideon. He looked up. She showed him the 2 figures. See, this is what you agreed to. This is what he's charging you. See, he looked at the numbers. For a moment his face was absolutely still. See, then something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, not anger, but the specific terrible expression of a man who'd suspected something for years, and now had it confirmed in plain arithmetic. See, he changed it, Gideon said. Or he applied a different rate and assumed you wouldn't check. See, either way, she tapped the page. This is a document. See, signed by both of you, with the original rate right there. See, he'll say I'm misreading it, then I'll read it again. See, and document it, and if there are other ranchers with notes from him, see, there are, at least a dozen, then they should be reading their notes too. See, Gideon leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a long moment in the way of a man who was recalculating something fundamental. See, you know what you're suggesting, he said. I know. See, if Slade finds out, he'll find out eventually regardless, Clara said. See, the question is whether we're ready when he does. See, she didn't sleep well that night. Not because she was afraid fear was a thing she'd gotten somewhat accustomed to in the past 2 years, had learned to treat it as information rather than instruction, but because she was thinking. See, running numbers, turning over possibilities. The house settled around her in its particular nighttime creaks, and she lay in the narrow bed with Maisie's warm weight beside her and thought about ledgers and notes and patterns. See, she was 3 weeks at Ironwood when she met Vernon Slade for the first time. See, he came on a Tuesday morning, riding in with 2 men she'd later learn were his regular companions. Not quite hired hands, not quite anything she had an easy name for. See, men who rode just slightly too close to him and never quite met anyone's eyes directly. See, Slade himself was heavier than she'd pictured from Gideon's description. See, not fat solid, in the way of a man who'd been physical most of his life and had only recently started wearing that weight differently. See, he had a broad, sun-damaged face and the manner of a man who'd been told he was impressive so many times he'd stopped noticing it was something anyone could withhold. See, Clara was hanging washing when they rode in. She watched them come through the gate. See, Gideon came out of the barn. Whatever greeting there was between them was not warm. See, she could see it in the set of Gideon's shoulders, the particular brace of a man talking to someone he owes money to and dislikes considerably. See, she went inside and finished what she was doing in the kitchen. See, when Slade came to the house, which he did about 20 minutes later, walking through the back door without knocking like a man who'd decided on the ownership of things already, she was standing at the stove. See, he stopped when he saw her, looked her over in a manner that managed to be assessing and dismissive simultaneously. See, who Clara Whitlock? I'm working for Mr. See, Rourke. Doing what? Cooking and keeping house. See, and the accounts. Something shifted in his expression. See, almost too small to see, but she'd spent 3 weeks sharpening her attention on exactly these ledgers, and she saw it. See, Rourke lets a hired woman look at his accounts. I don't know what Rourke lets, she said. See, I look at what's useful. Slade held her gaze for a moment. See, he smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind designed to make people feel like the conversation was friendlier than it was. See, well, useful. He looked around the kitchen. See, she could see him noticing the small changes she'd made, the organized supplies, the butter molds, the jars she'd been filling with preserved goods. See, how long have you been here? He asked. 3 weeks. See, He ran a finger along the counter idly. Rourke's a good man. See, hardworking. Shame about the finances. He said it with the particular warmth of someone describing another person's problem as though it had nothing to do with them. See, he owes a significant amount, you know. I've been patient. See, more patient than most. Clara kept her expression neutral. See, he mentioned. You should probably know, Slade said, almost conversationally, like it had just occurred to him, that Ironwood's situation is fairly far gone. See, I'd hate for you to work hard here and have it come to nothing. See, in my experience, it pays to know when something can be fixed and when it's just delaying the inevitable. He smiled again. See, might want to keep your options open is all. She looked at him. See, that's kind advice, she said. I'll think about it. See, he held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, just long enough to be a small demonstration of something, then turned and went back out. See, she listened to the hoofbeats until they faded. See, then she went to the desk. See, opened her notebook. See, and wrote down the date. See, the time and what he'd said. See, word for word, as close as she could reconstruct it. See, she wasn't sure yet why she'd need it. But she was beginning to understand that Vernon Slade wasn't a man who made casual conversation, and that nothing he'd just said to her had been particularly casual. See, October arrived with a cold that came a week ahead of schedule and reminded everyone that the frontier didn't negotiate. See, the vegetable garden had produced more than Clara had expected. The old seeds had surprised her, the turnips especially, and she'd spent the last weeks of September in a state of controlled urgency, preserving everything that could be preserved. See, laying in stores against the winter she knew was coming. See, Gideon watched her work with an expression she'd come to recognize, something between admiration and a kind of helpless frustration. See, like a man watching someone competently do a thing he should have done himself, and not being sure whether to be grateful or ashamed. See, she didn't push him on it. She'd noticed he had his own rhythm, that he worked best when he wasn't being directly observed, and she'd adjusted accordingly. See, but she'd also noticed other things. She'd been reorganizing the storage room off the kitchen when she found the first of them, a box tucked behind a shelf of old tools that held a collection of items that had no obvious reason to be together. See, a small sack of flour, a jar of lard, 3 tins of salt. See, a folded paper with an address written on it in Gideon's handwriting. See, she asked Pete about it. Pete, who communicated in the economy of a man who'd found words mostly got him in trouble, took a long moment before he said, he takes stuff. See, to people in town, folks who're struggling. Clara looked at the box. See, how often? Pete shrugged. Whenever there's something to spare. See, sometimes when there's not. She said nothing to Gideon about it. See, not that evening, not the following day. But she moved the box to a better spot in the storage room where it wouldn't get damp, and she added to it what she could afford to add without leaving them short. See, she found out about the Emery family the following week when she went to town with Pete to deliver the butter and eggs. See, Mrs. Halverson mentioned them in passing a family out on the eastern edge of the settlement, father bedridden all winter, 2 children younger than Maisie, mother trying to manage alone. See, that evening, Clara told Gideon she'd heard about the Emeris. See, he said nothing for a moment. Then he said, rough situation. See, I imagined so. Silence, the box in the storage room, she said. See, he didn't pretend not to know what box. He just looked at the table. See, I can spare some. I moved some things into it, added to what's there. She paused. See, it's a good thing you're doing. I want you to know I think that. See, he shook his head, not denying it. Something else, something she couldn't quite name. See, it doesn't cost much, he said. What's in that box? See, it costs something. When you're as short as you are, it costs something. See, he looked up at her then. For a moment, something open moved across his face. Not the closed, maintained expression he wore most of the time, but something underneath it. See, tired and real, and briefly, entirely unguarded. My wife used to say the same thing, he said. See, Clara didn't push on it. Some things you leave where they are. See, the second week of October was when things changed. See, Gideon had gone to sell the autumn cattle 20 head, the strongest of the herd, with Pete handling the transport. See, Clara had prepared a careful record of the weights from Gideon's own counts before they left. See, she had dates, animals, individual tallies. When Gideon came back, she saw it in his face before he dismounted. See, she was on the porch. She watched him ride in alone, Pete already having put the horses away, and she waited. See, he came up the steps and stood there for a moment. See, short again, he said. 43 pounds, short across the full lot. See, Slade says equipment variation. Clara went inside and got her notebook. See, brought it out. Showed him her pre-sale tallies against what he'd been given. See, 43 pounds at the going rate is... I know what it is. His voice had gone flat in a particular way. See, not at her, she understood that. At everything the number represented. See, I know exactly what it is. Write it down, she said. See, write what they told you. Exactly, he looked at her. See, Clara, I write it down, Gideon, please. He took the notebook. See, he wrote it down. She was still watching the road when Pete came out of the barn and walked to the house, and she noticed he had a folded piece of paper in his hand that he hadn't had before. See, he gave it to Gideon without ceremony. Gideon unfolded it, read it, and the color went out of his face. See, Clara asked. He handed it to her. It was a notice from Slade's office. See, the debt repayment deadline had been moved. Not October 31st. See, 18 days away. Full balance or foreclosure proceedings would begin. See, Clara read it twice. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the temperature. See, 18 days. And then she heard the sound of hoofbeats on the road, and she looked up, and Vernon Slade was already coming through the gate. See, he didn't knock. He pushed open the front door like he already owned the place. See, he found Clara in the kitchen, Maisie pressed against her side, Elias standing rigid near the wall. See, he pointed his finger at her face. Tell Rourke his time's up, Slade said. See, I'll be back with papers before the snow hits. And you, the finger didn't waver, you better pack whatever you dragged in here. See, because come winter, there won't be a roof left over your head worth standing under. See, Maisie's hand found Clara's apron. Clara looked at that finger. See, she thought about the ledgers, the mismatched weights. See, the altered interest rate. The families in town who'd been quietly swallowed by this man's system over 15 years. See, she thought about the box in the storage room and what it had cost Gideon to keep filling it. See, she thought about Gideon's face when he'd read that notice. See, she lowered her eyes from Slade's finger to his face. See, thank you for stopping by, Mr. Slade, she said. Her voice was steady. See, she had worked to make it steady, and it was. Mr. Rourke will be in directly. See, Slade held her gaze. Something flickered in his surprise, maybe, or the edge of something less pleasant. See, then he turned and walked out. The door swung behind him. See, Maisie let out a long, shaky breath. Elias looked at his mother. See, Clara was already walking to the desk. She opened the notebook. See, she wrote down the date, the time, the exact words, the exact gesture, and the names of both children who had witnessed it. See, then she looked up at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. See, then she went back to work, because 18 days was not nothing. See, 18 days, when a person was determined enough and had enough material to work with, was not nothing at all. See, and Clara Whitlock had spent the past month building exactly that, a record, a pattern, a ledger of a different kind. See, one that didn't belong to Vernon Slade and that he didn't know existed. See, he had come to Ironwood expecting to find a desperate widower and a hired woman who'd scatter like startled hens at the first sign of pressure. See, he had found something else entirely. He just didn't know it yet. See, outside the hoofbeats faded again down the road toward town. See, Pete appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hat in his hands, his expression asking a question he didn't put into words. See, Clara looked at him. "Go find Gideon," she said. "Tell him we need to sit down tonight and go through everything I have." See, all of it. Pete nodded and left. Maisie looked up at her mother. See, her face was still pale. "Are we going to lose this house too, Mama?" See, Clara looked at her daughter, at the gap where Maisie's left shoe was still splitting at the sole, even though Clara had stitched it twice already. See, at the way she held herself, too still, too careful, a child who'd learned that the floor could drop away without warning and was always slightly braced for it. See, she crouched down to Maisie's level. "No," she said. See, she meant it the way you mean something when you've decided, and deciding is a different thing from hoping. See, hoping was what she'd done on the road to Red Hollow, dragging a handcart with 63 cents in her pocket. See, deciding was what she was doing now. Maisie studied her face the way children do when they're trying to determine if an adult is telling the truth or just the kind version of it. See, whatever she saw, she nodded. "Okay," Maisie said. See, and somewhere outside, the wind picked up, the first real bite of it, the kind that carries a message about what's coming, and Clara Whitlock stood up, walked back to the desk, and kept writing. See, that night, after the children were in bed and Pete had gone to the bunkhouse, Clara spread everything across the kitchen table. See, all of it, every notebook, every ledger, every scrap of paper she'd been collecting and cross-referencing for the past month. See, Gideon's original tallies, Slade's transaction records. See, the note agreement with its original 4% clearly written and the 6% being applied. See, the dated entries in her own notebook weights, payments, the conversation in the kitchen when Slade had told her to keep her options open. See, the visit today with the deadline notice and the pointed finger and the words she'd written down, word for word, within 5 minutes of him walking out the door. See, Gideon sat across from her and looked at it all laid out together for the first time. See, he was quiet for a long time. "That's a lot," he said finally. See, "It's a start." Clara sat down. "It's not enough yet." See, he looked up at her. "What do you mean it's not enough?" "Clara, there are 4 separate discrepancies in the weights alone. There's the interest rate variance. See, it's evidence of a pattern," she said. See, but it's your records against his records, and his lawyer will stand up and say your tallies are informal and his are the official exchange documents, and without a witness to the weighing or a third party who's seen the same pattern. She stopped. See, looked at the table. "We need more." Gideon leaned back in his chair. See, the exhaustion on his face was the kind that had become structural, settled into the lines around his eyes and the set of his mouth like it had been there, so long he'd stopped noticing it. See, "Other ranchers," he said. "You said there were at least a dozen with notes from Slade." See, "At least. Do any of them keep their own tallies?" See, he thought about it. "Harlan Betts did. I know that." See, he was careful with his records, careful about everything, which is why it surprised people when his operation went under. He paused. See, "But Harlan's ranch is gone. He's working at the mill now." See, "He might not want to." "He might not," Clara agreed. See, "But he might." The fire had burned down to almost nothing again. See, neither of them moved to add wood. There was something about that hour of the night, that particular quiet with the wind picking up outside and the children asleep upstairs, that had become, not comfortable exactly, but workable. See, a space where they could say things directly that got complicated in the daytime. See, if I go to Harlan, Gideon said slowly, and I ask him to get involved, I'm asking him to go up against Slade. See again. A man who already lost everything once, I know. See, and if this doesn't work, if we make noise and can't back it up, Slade will make sure nobody in this territory will buy from us or sell to us. See, he controls the exchange, Clara. He controls the transport contracts. See, we'd be finished. Not just me, anyone who stood with us. See, Clara looked at him steadily. What happens if we do nothing? See, he didn't answer. He didn't have to. October 31st was 18 days away. See, doing nothing had a very clear outcome. I'll go to Harlan, he said. See, day after tomorrow, take my notebook, the one with the transaction comparisons. See, let him look at it and see if he recognizes the pattern. See, Gideon nodded. Then he looked at the spread of papers on the table, and something moved across his face that she'd seen before, that brief, unguarded expression that he usually shut down quickly. See, how are you doing this, he said. Doing what? All of it. See, you've been here a month. You came here with, he stopped himself, seemed to feel the edge of something impolite. See, with nothing much, she finished for him. You can say it. See, with not much, he amended. And you fixed the kitchen and the garden and the coop, and now he gestured at the table. See, Clara looked at the papers. I'm not doing anything complicated. See, I'm just paying attention. Most people don't. Most people can afford not to. She paused. See, I stopped being able to afford that about 2 years ago. See, he looked at her for a moment in the way he sometimes did, not intrusively, but like a man who was genuinely trying to understand something. See, your husband. He got sick. It took a long time. She said it without drama. See, she'd had time to get the drama out of it. The farm was already struggling before he passed. See, by the end I was running it alone anyway, but I was also watching him and trying to keep it from the children how bad things were. See, and by the time he was gone, she stopped. The debt had grown past what the land could carry. See, I tried for a year to hold it together. Then the bank made the decision for me. See, Gideon was quiet. I'm not looking for sympathy, she said. See, I'm explaining why I pay attention. Because I didn't pay enough attention soon enough on my own place, and I'm not making that mistake again. See, he nodded. Slow, deliberate, like he was filing it somewhere careful. See, Thomas was his name. Thomas, yes, another pause. See, outside, something moved in the wind, a branch scraping the side of the house, the familiar complaint of the loose board on the porch. See, Anne, Gideon said, not explaining, just offering it. See, his wife's name, like a small equal weight on the other side of a scale. See, Clara looked at him. How long? 3 years in December. See, she nodded. They didn't say anything else about it. See, they didn't need to. Some things are not about conversation. See, she gathered the papers and put them back in order, and they said good night in the practical way they'd developed. No excess of words, just the acknowledgement that there was work tomorrow and sleep was a resource neither of them wasted. See, she lay awake for an hour anyway. The 18 days felt like a physical thing in the room with her. See, not panic. She'd moved past the register of panic sometime in the last 2 years and had arrived at a different country, one where urgency was just a fact you worked inside of. See, but 18 days required a different kind of calculation. See, what could actually be done, what couldn't, where to spend the energy. See, she thought about Harlan Betts, who she'd never met, who'd lost his ranch 3 years ago and was now working at the mill. See, she thought about the 12 other ranchers with Slade's notes. See, she thought about whether any of them were keeping their own tallies, and whether any of them were at a desperate enough point that the risk of speaking up seemed smaller than the risk of staying silent. See, she fell asleep somewhere after midnight and woke before anyone else, as she always did now, and started the morning. See, Gideon left for town 2 days later, as promised. He took the notebook. See, Pete stayed to work the fence line with Elias, who had graduated from watching to actually doing and had the blisters on his palms to prove it. See, Owen had taken to following Elias around in the particular way of an 11-year-old who admired someone and was trying to learn without appearing to be learning, which Elias handled with more grace than Clara expected. See, Ruth and Maisie were another matter entirely. See, they had developed a friendship with the specific intensity that 8 and 9-year-old girls produce when they've decided they like each other, sudden, total, and occasionally impossible for everyone around them. See, Ruth had taken to braiding Maisie's hair. See, Maisie had taken to following Ruth to the chicken coop every morning in a reversal of the usual order, since Maisie had grown up farming, and Ruth had not been fully initiated into egg gathering until Maisie made it her project. See, Clara watched it happening with a specific feeling she couldn't entirely name. See, gratitude adjacent to grief, or the other way around. See, the sight of her daughter being a child again, lawing over something a hen did, arguing with Ruth about whose job it was to check the far corner of the coop, was something Clara hadn't seen enough of in the last 2 years. See, and it hit her sometimes with an unexpected force. See, Gideon came back from town after dark. Clara heard the horse before she heard the door. See, she'd kept dinner warm. He came in and she put the plate in front of him and waited. See, he ate about half of it before he said anything. Harlan looked at the notebook. See, and Gideon set down his fork. He was quiet for a long time. See, then he got up and went in the back room, came out with a box. He paused. See, he had 3 years of his own tallies. Clara, his discrepancies were bigger than mine. See, she sat down across from him. Did he know? He suspected. See, but he thought it was him, thought he'd miscounted, thought maybe his tallies were wrong. See, Slade had a man who worked the weights, who was very official about everything, very precise looking, and Harlan said it made him doubt himself. See, he doubted himself instead of doubting Slade. Yes, Gideon looked at her. See, that's exactly it. He said it out loud. He said, I thought I was the problem. See, Clara put her hand flat on the table for a moment. See, she understood that sentence in a way that had nothing to do with cattle weights. See, the slow erosion of a person's confidence in their own perception when something is being deliberately manipulated. See, she'd seen it in herself during the last year of the farm, wondering if she was managing wrong, working wrong, thinking wrong, when the problem was something she hadn't yet identified as external. See, is he willing to talk to others, she asked. He's willing to do more than that. See, he's got a neighbor, Ed Calloway, who lost 300 head to Slade's pricing over 2 years and has been convinced it was drought and bad luck. See, Harlan wants to bring him to see the notebook. Gideon picked up his fork again, then put it back down. See, and there's something else. She looked at him. Harlan said Slade has a man who works the exchange weights. See, name of Decker. And Decker has a brother who's worked there too, but the brother, according to Harlan, had a falling out with Slade about 8 months ago. See, left the territory, but Harlan knows where he went. See, Clara was quiet for a moment. A witness, potentially. See, can Harlan reach him? He says he can try. He's got a cousin in Laramie who knows the brother. He finally looked up at her properly. See, this is more than I thought it would be. It's the beginning of more, she said carefully. See, we still need to get through the 31st. The 31st. See, 12 days away now. I've been thinking about that, Gideon said. See, if I sell directly bypass Slade's exchange entirely, find buyers on my own, I can't get the price he'd offer. See, but I keep the full weight value. You know buyers who aren't connected to him? See, 2, maybe 3. He hesitated. The prices would be lower. See, lower but real, Clara said. Do it. He looked at her for a moment. See, then he nodded. The next 10 days were the hardest Clara had worked since the last autumn on the farm. See, she and Gideon operated in a kind of parallel urgency, him handling the cattle arrangements and the quiet, careful conversations with other ranchers that Harlan had begun facilitating. See, her managing the house with half her mind and filling the other half with documentation. See, she began writing a formal summary. Not the raw notes, those were useful but unwieldy. See, she wrote a clean version, organized by category, weight discrepancies with dates and amounts. See, interest rate variance with the original document cited. See, timeline of the deadline acceleration with the exact wording of Slade's notice. See, her own first-person account of his visit, corroborated by the children's presence. See, she borrowed a good pen from the small store in town, using 2 of the butter coins, and wrote it in her clearest hand. See, when Gideon saw it, he read it twice without speaking. See, you write like a lawyer, he said. I write like a farmer's wife who had to correspond with a bank for 7 years, she said. See, same general territory. He almost smiled. It was the closest she'd seen him get to one. See, Pete, who turned out to have more connections in Red Hollow than his silence suggested, came back from an errand in town with the information that Ed Calloway had met with Harlan and was now, in Pete's words, fairly agitated. He also reported that a woman named Mrs. Grantley, a widow who ran a small sheep operation on the North Road, had been listening when Harlan talked to Calloway and had things to say about Slade's pricing practices that went back 8 years. 8 years. Clara wrote that down too. The direct cattle sale happened on the 26th. Gideon rode out with Pete and came back by evening. The price was lower than Slade's rate. She'd known it would be. But the weight was full. Every pound accounted for, because the buyer did his own count with his own scale, and there was no one between them and the number to make it disappear. Gideon put the money on the kitchen table. More than she'd expected. Not enough to clear the debt, but enough, combined with the butter and egg income and 2 other smaller transactions she'd arranged, to demonstrate cash flow that hadn't existed a month ago. Is it enough, she asked. He ran the numbers in his head. She watched him do it, the slight movement of his lips, the way he looked at nothing for a moment. If I can get a partial payment to Slade's office before the 31st and contest the deadline acceleration as a violation of the original agreement terms, and if Harlan and Calloway are willing to formally back the weight discrepancy claim, then it becomes contested rather than settled, Clara said. And a contested foreclosure takes longer. Takes longer, he agreed. Long enough till he stopped. Long enough to do this properly, she said. He looked at her. The firelight was behind her, and she probably looked less calm than she was trying to look, but she held his gaze anyway. I need you to know, he said slowly, that if this goes wrong, if Slade retaliates, and he will retaliate, it won't just affect me. It'll affect you and the children, anyone who's been under this roof. I know that. I want to be sure you, Gideon. She said his name the way she said the children's names when she needed them to hear her clearly. I know that. I've known it since I found those ledgers. I'm still here. He looked at her for a long moment in the quiet. All right, he said. All right. Then November arrived early, the way it does in the high country, without apology, without the gradual courtesy of cooling. It arrived as cold, and then as wind, and then on a Tuesday that had seemed like any other morning until around noon, it arrived as snow. Not a light snow, not a first snow, a snow that had been saving itself. Clara had seen it building in the sky for 2 days, and had said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say about weather, and everything useful had already been done. The cattle moved to the closer pasture, extra wood laid in. The root cellar double-checked. The gap under the kitchen door, addressed with a strip of old leather that Elias had cut and nailed himself without being asked. When the snow actually came, it came fast. By afternoon, it was a foot. By evening, it was past the second step of the porch. The temperature dropped into a place where the cold stopped being a sensation and became a presence, something that pushed back when you opened a door. They were all inside by 4 o'clock. 8 people in a house that had been built for one family and was now holding 2, plus Pete, who'd made it in from the bunkhouse before the light entirely failed. The children were in the main room near the fire. Pete sat with his hat in his hands and looked at the window with the expression of a man who'd spent many winters on the frontier and had never quite made peace with them. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard Gideon say something to Pete in a low voice. She came to the doorway. He had his coat on. The northeast fence, he said. He was talking to Pete, but his eyes moved to her. I need to check the northeast fence. That section was already weak, and if it's come down in this, the cattle will scatter. Pete stood up. I'll go. You've got a bad ankle from last week. I'll go. He was already moving toward the door. Gideon. Clara stepped into the room. See, you can't in this. The cattle scatter in a blizzard. We lose half the herd, he said. See, not sharp, just stating the arithmetic. That's the ranch. See, that's the rest of winter. That's he stopped. His eyes moved to the children briefly. See, all four of them in a row by the fire like paper cutouts, watching. See, I'll be an hour, he said. Take Pete. Pete can't ride with that ankle. See, take a lamp. Take rope. Take Clara, he said her name the same way she'd said his. See, the quiet authority of it stopped her. I've done this before. See, I'll be back. She looked at him. He went out the door and the cold came in for a moment, and then the door closed and he was gone. See, she counted the minutes the way she counted everything practically, without drama. See, she kept the children fed and the fire built. She helped Maisie and Ruth with the small task she invented for them sorting dried beans, which needed doing anyway and would keep their hands busy. See, Owen sat at the table pretending to look at something and actually watching the door. See, Elias stood near the window. An hour passed. Pete came to stand beside her in the kitchen. See, he didn't say anything. His face said enough, 2 hours. See, the storm outside had become a sound rather than just weather. A continuous low roar that pressed against every wall of the house simultaneously, the kind of sound that makes a person aware of exactly how thin the barrier is between inside and out. See, 2.5 hours. Clara was standing in the kitchen with her coat already on before she fully decided anything. See, Mrs. Whitlock. Pete's voice. I need the rope from the storage room. See, the long one. She was already moving, and a lamp that won't blow out. See, you can't go out in the rope, Pete. She came out with her coat buttoned. See, Elias was standing in the kitchen doorway. He had his coat on. See, she looked at her son. No, she said. 2 people is safer than 1, he said. See, if he's hurt, you can't carry him alone. He was 13. See, he was 5 feet 7 inches and had been doing ranch work for 2 months. See, he was also right. She looked at him for 1 long second. See, stay close to me, she said. You don't go more than arm's length away. See, if you can't see me, you stop and you call out. Do you understand? See, yes, I mean it, Elias. I know you mean it. Pete handed her the rope and the lamp he'd managed to shield. See, she looked back at the main room, Owen and Ruth and Maisie by the fire, all 3 of them silent, watching her with the particular stillness of children who know something serious is happening and are waiting to see how adults handle it. See, stay together, she told them. Don't open any doors. See, Pete stays with you. Then she and Elias went out into the storm. See, the cold hit like something physical, not gradual, immediate, total, the kind of cold that takes away the option of pretending. See, the snow was above her knees in the open yard, and the wind came in sheets that made direction a concept rather than a fact. See, she angled herself against it. She had a direction northeast, where Gideon had said the fence was. See, she had a lamp. She had rope tied to the porch post and played out behind her so there was a line back to the house. See, she had Elias's hand, which he'd taken when they cleared the porch without asking or being asked. See, they walked. She called Gideon's name. The wind took it, but she kept calling. See, every dozen steps, his name into the white, because if he was conscious somewhere in this, he needed to be able to find them as much as they needed to find him. See, the northeast fence was about 400 yards from the house. See, it took them, she couldn't say how long enough. See, long enough for her feet to stop sending clear information and her face to stop feeling like a face. See, Elias didn't let go of her hand. She didn't let go of his. See, she found the horse first, a dark shape where a dark shape shouldn't have been, down on one side. See, she went to it and found it alive, breathing, but with one front leg at an angle that explained why it was down. See, and 3 feet from the horse, a shape in the snow that was darker than the surrounding white and longer than anything else should be in that spot. See, Mama. Elias's voice very close to her ear. She was already there. See, already on her knees in the snow, Gideon was face up. See, not buried. The horse had partially sheltered him, or he'd been sheltered by the collapsed fence post he was wedged against, or both. See, he was breathing. She could see it. His right arm was at an angle that was clearly wrong, a bad break, or worse, and when she touched his face, his skin was the color that meant she had considerably less time than she would like. See, Gideon. She put her face close to his. Gideon, open your eyes. See. Nothing. Gideon. Louder, her hand on his face. Gideon Rourke, open your eyes right now. See, his eyes opened, unfocused, moving, then finding her. See, Clara. His voice was barely voice, mostly just the shape of the word. See, I'm here, we're going to move you. This is going to hurt. She looked at Elias. See, Elias was already positioning himself, reading the situation with the focused calm of a boy who'd been dealing with emergencies since he was 11 and had gotten competent at them because he'd had to. See, on 3, she said. It took them 40 minutes to get Gideon back to the house. See, she would never be entirely able to account for those 40 minutes. They existed in her memory as sensation rather than sequence. See, the weight of him, the places where the snow was deeper and they went down and had to get back up. See, Elias's breathing, labored and steady, never stopping, never letting go of his side of the burden. See, Gideon making no sound at all except occasionally her name, which she answered every time. See, the rope, following the rope back through the white. See, the light in the window. Pete opening the door, they got Gideon inside. See, onto the floor near the fire because there was no time for anywhere else. See, Pete took his other side. Clara assessed the arm broken in 2 places, she thought, from the look and the location, though she was no doctor. See, he was conscious but barely, and his temperature was a thing she dealt with in the pragmatic and immediate way. See, which meant blankets and heat, and getting his boots off and his wet clothes off, and the particular organized urgency of someone who is doing exactly what needs to be done and has no capacity left for anything else. See, the children were silent, all 4 of them, against the far wall, watching. See, Ruth was holding Maisie's hand. Owen was staring at his father on the floor near the fire, and his face was the face of an 11-year-old who had gone somewhere past fear into a place that looked like very old calm. See, he's going to be all right, Clara told him. She said it, looking at him directly, not performing it. See, Owen looked back at her. How do you know? Because we got to him. See, he considered this. Seemed to find it sufficient. He sat down. See, she worked on Gideon through most of the night. The storm continued outside. See, the fire continued inside. Somewhere in the small hours, Gideon's eyes opened properly, and he looked at her with something approaching actual focus. See, the fence, he said. The fence doesn't matter right now. See, the cattle, Gideon. Stop, he stopped. He looked at the ceiling. See, then he looked at her. Elias? Here, said Elias, from the corner where he'd fallen asleep sitting up and had woken at his name. See, Gideon closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something had changed in them, a quality that she would think about later. Something like relief at too great a depth to have been just about the blizzard. See, she splinted his arm with what she had straight wood from the kindling and strips of cloth, and she did it as well as it could be done without a doctor, which she acknowledged was imperfect, but was what was available. See, she told him it would need a proper doctor in the morning when the storm cleared. See, he said he'd had worse. She doubted that, but she let it go. See, by 3 a.m, the worst of the storm had shifted. The howling had dropped to a complaint rather than a declaration. See, and Gideon was asleep on the floor near the fire with a reasonable temperature and the splinted arm resting on a folded blanket. See, Pete was in the chair beside him. The children were piled on the sofa and the floor in the unself-conscious heap of the exhausted. See, Clara sat at the kitchen table. She should sleep. She knew that. See, she had nothing left that wasn't necessary, and sleep was necessary. See, instead she sat there and looked at her hands for a moment. See, they were red from the cold and the work and the particular effort of the last several hours, and they were not steady, not shaking, but not steady either, the fine trembling of a body that had used everything it had and was now being asked to stop. See, she put her hands flat on the table. She thought about the foreclosure notice. See, October 31st had passed while she was managing the documentation and the butter sales and the conversations about contested deadlines. See, Slade's lawyer had received a letter written by Clara, signed by Gideon contesting the deadline acceleration and citing the original agreement terms. See, the letter had been carefully worded and precisely documented, and Harlan's name had been on it as a corroborating party. See, Slade had not yet responded. His silence in the past week had not been peaceful. See, it had been the silence of a man deciding which direction to strike from. See, and now Gideon was on the floor with a broken arm, and when morning came and the snow cleared, whoever Slade sent would find him there. See, she thought about that. Then she stood up, moved quietly so as not to wake anyone. See, went to the desk, got her notebook, the organized one, the one written in the good pen. See, got the ledger box where she'd been storing the original documents. See, she sat back down at the kitchen table and she read through everything she had. See, all of it, from the beginning. By the time gray morning light started coming through the window, she had added 3 pages of new notes and organized the box in the way that made the most sense for someone who needed to understand it quickly, see, from the outside, without the month of context she had. See, like a lawman or a judge, someone who would need it to be clear. See, she closed the box and sat with her hands around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. See, outside the snow had stopped. The world was white and absolute and quiet. See, Gideon was breathing steadily near the fire. The children were sleeping. See, and somewhere on the road into Red Hollow, a man who had changed a deadline and pointed his finger and said the words she'd written down word for word, witnessed and dated, was going to have a different kind of morning than he was planning on. See, Clara didn't know exactly when he'd come. She knew he'd come. See, and she was going to be standing on the porch when he did, with the locked box in her hands, and she was not going to move. See, he came at dawn. Clara heard the horses before she saw them 3 sets of hooves on the frozen road, moving at the unhurried pace of men who are not worried about opposition. See, she was already on the porch. See, she had been on the porch for 20 minutes, standing in the cold with the wooden box under her arm and her coat buttoned to the throat, watching the road turn from black to gray as the sky, what kind of morning it was going to be. See, it decided on pale and hard and flat, the way the sky looks after a blizzard when the clouds have spent themselves and left everything raw. See, Slade rode in front. His 2 men flanked him at a slight distance, that particular formation of men who are present to suggest consequence rather than participate in conversation. See, behind them, in a wagon that moved slower than the horses, was a man Clara recognized from her one trip to the county office as someone who worked in a legal capacity for the territory. See, he had papers in his lap and the expression of a man who processed these situations professionally and had long ago stopped wondering about the people inside the properties. See, Slade pulled up at the gate. He looked at the porch. See, he looked at Clara. For just a momentless, then a second something moved across his face that was not quite surprise. See, then the practiced ease came back, the settled confidence of a man who has determined in advance how things will go. See, he dismounted and came through the gate without latching it behind him. See, Mrs. Whitlock, he said, acknowledging her in the way powerful men acknowledge obstacles by naming them without particularly seeing them. See, Mr. Slade. He looked at the box under her arm. Is Rourke available? See, Mr. Rourke had an accident in last night's storm, she said. See, broken arm, exposure. He's inside recovering. Slade made a sound that was adjacent to sympathy without being it. See, unfortunate. He gestured to the man in the wagon, who was already climbing down with his papers. See, I'm afraid an injury doesn't alter the legal situation. See, we have a foreclosure order from the court. You have a foreclosure order based on a deadline that was unilaterally altered from the original agreement, Clara said. See, she said it the way she'd practiced it through the night, not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. See, like a woman reading a number from a ledger, which is documented in writing, signed by both parties and in Mr. See, Rourke's possession. Slade paused. He looked at her with a slightly more focused version of the attention he'd been giving her. See, the deadline adjustment was within the terms of the minutes. See, The original note specifies that deadline modifications require 30 days written notice to the debtor and written acknowledgement from the debtor before taking effect. She had read that sentence so many times she could have said it in her sleep. See, Mr. Rourke received 12 days' notice. There was no written acknowledgement because Mr. Rourke did not agree to the modification. The legal man had stopped walking. He was looking at Slade with the specific expression of a professional who has just countered information that makes his morning more complicated. Slade's jaw moved. That's a creative interpretation. It's the exact language of the agreement, Clara said. I have a copy here. She opened the box. She took out the document, the original note agreement, which she had kept in the box for exactly this reason, and held it out toward the legal man, not Slade. Page 2, third paragraph. The legal man took it. Read it. His expression did not change, but his eyes moved in the way of someone reading something twice. Slade said, "Marsh, give me a moment." The legal man, Marsh, said quietly. He kept reading. Clara kept her face still. She had not slept. She was aware of it in the distant way of someone running on something other than rest, and she knew that later her body would present her with an accounting she'd have to pay, but later was not now, and she set it aside. The front door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. She heard it and knew from the sound, the particular way it moved, the weight of the step on the porch boards, that it was Gideon. Gideon. She said low. "You should be inside. It's my ranch," he said. His voice was rough, and she could hear the pain in it, but it was clear. He came and stood beside her. He was in his coat over his nightclothes, the splinted arm against his chest, his face the color of a man who had spent a night on a floor near a fire after a blizzard and looked exactly like it. He was upright. That was what mattered. Slade looked at him. Rourke. You should have a doctor see to that arm. I'll get to it, Gideon said. What are you doing on my property, Vernon? Executing a foreclosure order. On a contested deadline, Gideon's eyes moved to Clara, briefly checking the situation the way he'd learned to check it, and then back to Slade. You changed the terms. That's in the contract. The contract gives me discretion to. Page 2, Clara said again to Marsh. Third paragraph. Marsh looked up from the document. He looked at Slade with the careful neutrality of a man who has just found himself in the middle of something he wasn't adequately briefed on. Mr. Slade, the language here is fairly specific. If proper notice wasn't given. The notice was given, Slade said. The ease in his manner had shifted slightly. Not gone, he was too experienced for that, but recalibrated. Recalculating. 12 days is the agreement says 30, Clara said. There are extenuating circumstances. There are documents, Clara said. Which is different from circumstances. Slade turned to look at her directly. She met his gaze and held it. The two flanking men were motionless on their horses, watching. Pete had appeared in the doorway behind her and Gideon, and she heard, further back, the quieter sounds of children being kept inside Owen's voice, low and instructing. Which surprised her until she realized he was keeping the younger ones away from the door. Slade said, "You're a housekeeper, Mrs. Whitlock. This is a legal proceeding." "I'm aware of what it is," she said. "Would you like to see the rest of what's in this box, Mr. Slade?" He looked at the box. He kept his face arranged. But she had been watching faces carefully for a long time. Thomas's face through 2 years of illness, the bankman's face the morning of the eviction. Gideon's face when he'd read the deadline notice, and she had gotten good at reading what was underneath the arrangement. Underneath Vernon Slade's arrangement, something had sharpened. Not panic. He was too composed for panic, but attention. Real attention, the kind he hadn't been giving her previously. She took the next document from the box, and the next. She laid them on the porch railing in the cold morning light, the transaction comparison sheets, the weight discrepancy records, the dated entries from her notebook. She didn't hand them to him. She set them where Marsh could see them. Cattle sale records, she said. Mr. Rourke's own weight tallies compared to the exchange records from your operation over 4 years. C. I've also included comparable records from Harlan Betts's operation for the 3 years prior to his foreclosure, which Mr. C. Betts has provided voluntarily. She set down the next sheet. C. The consistent discrepancy averages 67 pounds per transaction across 41 sales. C. At market rate, that amounts to... She had the number ready because she had done it 4 times to be sure, a cumulative shortfall of approximately $940 over 4 years. C. Slade said nothing. I've also noted the interest rate variance. She set down the copy she'd made of the original note alongside a page from the ledger. C. The agreed rate and the applied rate. The difference over the loan period compounded at the actual rate of application accounts for a significant portion of what you're now claiming, Mr. C. Rourke owes. Marsh had moved closer to the railing. C. He was looking at the documents. This is Slade started. C. His voice had lost something, not the steadiness, but the warmth it usually deployed. C. What was left was cooler and more direct, which was, Clara thought, probably closer to who he actually was. C. This is a collection of a woman's personal notebooks against official exchange records. C. Do you understand the difference between... I understand the difference between a notebook and an official record, Clara said. C. I also understand the difference between one rancher's tallies and the same pattern appearing across multiple ranchers over multiple years. C. Mr. Betts's records, Mr. Calloway's records. She set down another sheet. C. And I have a signed statement from a man named James Decker, who worked the exchange weights for you for 6 years and left your employ 8 months ago. C. The silence that followed had a different quality than the previous silences. C. Slade's right hand, hanging at his side, moved slightly. C. A small, involuntary movement. Clara noticed it the way she noticed everything she'd trained herself to notice. C. James Decker, Slade said, is a disgruntled former employee with reasons to. C. He's a man with a memory and a conscience and a signed statement, Clara said. C. His account of specific instructions he received regarding the weighing process is in the box. C. Along with dates, names, and the amounts involved, she paused. C. Mr. Marsh, I want to be clear about something. This isn't a dispute about one rancher's debt. C. This is documentation of a systematic practice affecting multiple properties over multiple years. C. That changes the nature of what's being executed here this morning. C. Marsh looked at her, then at Slade, then back at the documents on the railing. C. Mr. Slade, he said carefully. I need to review this material before I can proceed. C. Marsh, I need to review this material. His voice was pleasant and absolutely firm. C. The two flanking men looked at each other. They had the expressions of men who were employed for a specific kind of situation and had arrived to find a completely different kind. C. Gideon was very still beside her. She could feel him beside her, the warmth of him, despite the cold, the controlled steadiness of someone who was in significant pain and refusing to show it to the man in front of him. C. Slade looked at Clara for a long moment. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has significantly underestimated, and the particular expression of it was not respect, not yet, not from him, but recognition. C. The recognition of a person who has just understood what they're actually dealing with. C. This isn't over, he said. No, Clara agreed. It's really not. C. Slade turned. He walked back through the gate and mounted his horse. C. The flanking men followed. C. Marsh gathered the documents Clara had laid out. She let him take the copies. The original stayed in the box and returned to the wagon with the careful movements of a man carrying something that has become more significant than it was an hour ago. C. They left. Clara stood on the porch until the sound of horses and wagon faded down the frozen road. C. Then she became aware of several things simultaneously. Her hands were cold. Her body was shaking very slightly in the way it had been in the kitchen the night before. C. And Gideon was sitting down on the porch step because he'd apparently reached the limit of what upright was going to give him this morning. C. She sat down beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. C. James Decker, Gideon said finally. How did you get a signed statement from James Decker? See, Harlan's cousin reached him in Laramie. Decker wrote it out, signed it, and Harlan's cousin had it witnessed and put it on the stage to Red Hollow. She paused. See, it arrived 3 days ago. I didn't tell you because you were dealing with the cattle sale, and I didn't want. See, you didn't want me to know we had it in case I did something premature, Gideon said. See, she looked at him. He looked back. Yes, she said. See, he made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite his face, wasn't quite organized for laughing, but the shape of one. See, that's fairly calculating. I'm a fairly calculating person. See, I'm becoming aware of that. The door opened behind them. See, Elias came out first, then Owen close behind him, and then because nothing and no one was keeping Maisie inside once the horses had gone, Maisie and Ruth in a combined unit. See, Ruth with her arm around Maisie in the way she'd developed of being protective of a child who was actually a year older than her. See, Owen looked at his father on the step. His father looked back at him. See, he's gone, Owen said. For now, Gideon said. Is it over? See, Clara and Gideon exchanged a look. Not yet, Gideon said. See, but we're still here. Owen considered this. Then he sat down on the step on Gideon's other side, careful of the arm, and leaned against him slightly in the way of a boy who was trying to seem less relieved than he was. See, they were still on the porch, all 6 of them, which was impractical in the cold, but seemed to be where everyone had landed, when Pete came out and said the cattle had not scattered as badly as feared. See, most of the herd was in the near pasture. Some had pushed through the downed fence section and were in the east field, which was still enclosed. See, 11 head unaccounted for, which was bad but not catastrophic. See, Gideon started to stand. Clara put her hand on his shoulder. See, he stopped. Pete and Elias will take the east field, she said. See, when you can stand up straight without going gray around the eyes, you can help. See, not before. He looked at her hand on his shoulder. See, then he sat back down. I've been running this ranch for 12 years, he said. See, I know that. I don't generally need to be told. See, I know that too. She took her hand back. See, and your arm is broken in 2 places, and you spent last night on the floor after riding into a blizzard, and Pete and Elias are both capable of finding 11 cattle in an enclosed field without supervision. She paused. See, so sit down, he sat. Elias was already heading to the barn. See, Pete fell in beside him. Clara watched them go with the specific feeling of a mother watching a son move inside competence he didn't have 4 months ago. Not all the way there, not without gaps, but so much further than he'd been. See, the farm in Millhaven felt like a different geography. See, not just far away, but removed in the way that the past is removed from the present same map, different country. See, she went inside and made coffee and brought it out. See, Gideon accepted it with both hands wrapped around the cup, using the broken arm only slightly, which told her it hurt more than he was saying, which she already knew. See, the children drifted back inside by degrees, Ruth first, because she was practical and cold, then Maisie, then Owen last. See, Gideon stayed on the step. Clara sat beside him and drank her own coffee and let the morning settle. See, what happens now, Gideon said. Not a question exactly, more of an accounting. See, with Slade. He's going to get legal advice, Clara said. See, Marsh is going to read those documents. Marsh is going to tell him the foreclosure can't proceed as filed because of the deadline violation, and he's going to tell him that the other documents create a liability he needs to assess. She paused. See, what Slade does after that depends on what kind of man he is when things are complicated. See, dangerous kind, Gideon said. I think so too. She held her coffee. See, but I sent copies. He turned to look at her. Copies. See, of everything in the box. 3 sets. See, 1 to Harlan, 1 to a lawyer in the county seat whose name the general store owner gave me, a man named Ferris, who apparently has reasons of his own to dislike Slade, and 1 to the Territorial Land Office. She paused. See, 3 weeks ago, when I finished the organized version. See, Gideon stared at her. 3 weeks ago, I wanted to be sure they'd arrived before he came. See, I didn't know when he'd come, so I needed to be sure. See, he kept looking at her. The expression on his face was complicated in a way she didn't try to fully read. See, If he destroys what's here, she said, there are 3 other copies that don't belong to him. See, Clara needed it to be safe, she said simply. See, documents aren't evidence if they can be taken. He turned back to the road. See, he was quiet for a while. The morning had gone from pale gray to something slightly warmer, the light shifting in the way it does after a storm when the world is reconsidering itself. See, I keep thinking, he said, about what would have happened. See, if you hadn't found those ledgers, if you'd been, he stopped. See, anyone else. She thought about that, about the road into Red Hollow with the handcart and the 63 cents and the children in their split shoes. See, about the choice she'd made standing at the gate. Not a brave choice, not a strategic one, just the only choice available and taken because there was no other direction. See, you opened the gate, she said, that wasn't much. See, it was the only thing that needed to happen, she said. See, he looked down at his coffee. She could see the line of his jaw, the exhaustion and the pain, and something underneath it that was newer than both something. She'd been watching develop over 2 months and had not named. See, because naming things before they were ready to be named had a way of making them complicated. See, she left it alone. What she didn't know yet, what the next weeks would begin to reveal, was that sending those copies had started something she hadn't entirely anticipated. See, she had sent them to protect Gideon's evidence. See, but Ferris, the lawyer in the county seat, was a man who had been looking for exactly this kind of documentation, for reasons connected to a case against Slade's lending practices that had stalled for lack of evidence 2 years prior. See, he had opened Clara's envelope on a Tuesday morning, read through the organized summary written in her clear hand, and then called for his clerk and said the case was live again. See, Harlan, meanwhile, had done something Clara had suggested, but hadn't expected him to act on quite so quickly. He'd visited every rancher he knew with a note from Slade and told them to get their own records out and start comparing. See, not to take action yet, just to look, just to know. See, most of them looked. Most of them found something. See, the ranchers of Red Hollow territory had been dealing with Slade individually, each one isolated in their own financial difficulty, each one inclined to doubt their own tallies rather than his official records. See, each one silenced by the knowledge that he controlled the only exchange in practical range. See, they had kept their suspicions to themselves the way people keep embarrassments, privately, quietly, increasingly heavy. See, what Clara's documentation did, in the hands of Harlan and Ferris and the land office, was name the thing that everyone had been carrying alone. See, and naming a thing collectively does something that individual suspicion can't do. See, it became real. It took another 2 weeks for Slade to make his next move, 2 weeks, during which Ironwood continued functioning with the specific stubborn momentum that Clara had been building since October. See, the cattle that had scattered were recovered, all but 3, which was a loss but not a killing one. See, Gideon got the doctor out from town to properly set the arm, which involved pain and expense, and Gideon's jaw being set in a particular way for the duration that suggested he was somewhere else mentally while his body endured the procedure. See, the splint was replaced with a proper cast. He was told 8 weeks. See, he started working around it in 3. Clara said nothing about this. See, she had learned which fights were worth having. November moved forward with the cold, specific determination of November, and Ironwood moved with it. See, the root cellar was full, not overflowing, but sufficient, which was more than it had been when she'd first opened it. See, the butter and egg income continued. She'd found a 3rd buyer for preserved goods in a hotel in the next town over, a connection she'd made through Mrs. See, Halverson, who'd mentioned the hotel cook, complained constantly about suppliers. See, Clara had written the hotel cook a letter. The hotel cook had written back. See, it was not a large account. It was real, reliable money that Slade had nothing to do with. See, she was reorganizing the storage room when Gideon appeared in the doorway. See, letter came, he said. She turned. He was holding it, a formal envelope with the Territorial Land Office seal. See, he held it out to her. She looked at it. That's addressed to you. See, you should read it. She took it, read it again. See, the Territorial Land Office had opened a formal investigation into the operations of Slade's livestock exchange and associated lending practices. See, the investigation had been prompted by documentation received from multiple parties, including a statement from James Decker and records provided by several ranchers. See, Slade's exchange was under an immediate operational review. See, during the review period, any foreclosure proceedings connected to Slade's notes were suspended pending examination of the underlying debt calculations. See, suspended. She looked up. Gideon was watching her. See, he had the expression of a man who has received news too large to have a properly sized reaction to. See, suspended, she said. That's what it says. Pending examination. See, yes, she set the letter down on the shelf beside her. See, she put her hand on the shelf for a moment and looked at nothing in particular. See, the feeling that came through her was complicated, not euphoria, not yet. It was too early for that, and she was too experienced with things going sideways to mistake a preliminary victory for a final one, but something real. See, something with weight to it. Relief had edges. See, this kind of relief had the particular edge of a person who has been braced for impact for so long that the absence of it takes a moment to register in the body as something other than a pause between blows. See, she took a breath. It's not over, she said. No, Gideon agreed. See, but it's something. She picked up the letter again. See, folded it and put it back in the envelope. We should get this to Harlan today. See, and I want to write to Ferris, Clara. She looked at him. See, he was standing in the doorway of the storage room in the afternoon light, his arm in the cast, his face still carrying the marks of the storm and the weeks before it, the weathered lines. See, the exhaustion that had become less total recently, but was still there, would probably always be a little there. See, he looked like a man who had come through something and was standing on the other side of it. See, he said, "Thank you." She looked at him. She had gotten, over 2 months, somewhat practiced at reading the things Gideon said underneath the things he said. See, he was precise with words in the way of someone who'd learned that words cost something and tried not to waste them. See, this 1-2 words, nothing elaborate, was carrying more than its surface. See, you opened the gate, she said again. He shook his head slightly. See, that's not what I mean, and you know it. She did know it. See, she let herself know it for a moment, standing in the storage room with the letter in her hand and the cold coming in from the gap she still hadn't fixed at the base of the outer wall. See, she let herself feel the shape of the last 2 months, the fear that had been constant but had been treated as information, the work that had been relentless but had been purposeful. See, the way this house and these children and this land had stopped feeling like temporary shelter and had started feeling like… See, she stopped herself there. "Let me get the letter to Harlan," she said. See, "then we can talk." He nodded, stepped back from the doorway. See, she passed him in the narrow space and went to get her coat. See, the visit to Harlan was brief. His reaction to the letter was not. See, he read it 3 times and then sat very still for a long moment. See, and Clara could see in his face the particular expression of a man who has spent 3 years believing he was the cause of his own ruin and is only now beginning to consider that he might not have been. See, she didn't push on it. She gave him the copy she'd made for him and let him sit with it. See, on the way back from Harlan's, on the road between his small house near the mill and Ironwood's gate, something happened that she hadn't planned for. See, she passed Ed Calloway coming the other direction. See, he saw her, stopped his horse, and looked at her with the expression of a man who has something to say and has been working up to it for a while. See, "You're the woman from Ironwood," he said, "Clara Whitlock." See, yes. He looked at her for a moment. "Harlan showed me the papers." See, "Your papers." "The comparison sheets," he paused. 3 years I thought I managed badly." See, 3 years. Clara held her horse still. "I know," she said. See, "my wife." He stopped. His face did something difficult. See, "She thought it was my fault. Wouldn't say it directly, but I knew she thought it." He shook his head. See, "It wasn't just the cattle, it was I stopped trusting myself." See, "After a while, you stop trusting yourself." See, she recognized that sentence with the full weight of her own experience. See, I know that too, she said. He looked at her. See, is there going to be anything done about it? Really done? Or is it going to be one of those things that gets looked at and then gets... He made a gesture that meant what it always meant. The powerful staying powerful. See, I don't know, she said. But there are more of us than there are of him. See, and we have documentation. That's a different situation than any of you had before. See, he held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, the slow, weighted nod of a man making a decision. See, I've got records, he said, from before I got discouraged and stopped keeping them. See, I've got 2 years. Keep them, she said, and write down what you told me just now. See, the specific pattern, when you started, what changed, what you observed. See, in your own words, signed and dated. He nodded again. See, she rode back to Ironwood. 2 days later, without any particular coordination that she'd arranged, a thing began happening in Red Hollow that had its own momentum. See, Calloway had spoken to 2 other men. Those men had spoken to others. See, at the general store, at the livery, in the small conversations that make up the actual fabric of a place, people who had been carrying private suspicions and private self-doubt began cautiously to compare notes. See, not organized, not formal, just talking. The way people talk when something that was private becomes suddenly shared. See, Clara heard about it from Pete, who heard things in the way quiet people hear things by being present and unremarkable enough that people forgot to lower their voices. See, he reported it to her in his economy of words. People were talking. See, Harlan's name was coming up. Her name was coming up. See, she was at the kitchen table when Pete told her this, and she kept her face still, but she felt something that had not been in this kitchen when she arrived. A warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. See, Gideon was sitting across from her. He looked at Pete. See, then at her. The settlement's coming around, he said. See, seems like it, Pete said. He put his hat back on and went out. See, they were alone in the kitchen. The children were outside, all 4 of them, in the yard, doing something that involved Owen directing, and everyone else arguing about the direction, see, which seemed to be their primary social mode, and had lately started sounding less like friction and more like a language. See, I've been thinking about something, Gideon said. See, Clara looked at him. She waited, the cattle situation, he said. See, if Slade's exchange is under review, which it is, and if the investigation goes the way it seems to be going, the ranchers around here are going to need somewhere to sell. He paused. See, a reliable somewhere, with transparent pricing and honest weights. See, Clara set down her pen. A cooperative, she said. See, he looked at her. You thought about it too. I thought about it the week after I found the ledger, she said. See, but it wasn't the right time to say so. He almost smiled again. See, he was doing it slightly more often now, the almost smile that got a little closer to completing itself each time. See, when were you going to say so? When we weren't about to lose the ranch, she said. See, which we are no longer about to do. She paused. Harlan would be a good person to involve in the structure. See, he's respected and he's motivated. Calloway too. I've got grazing land on the east side that's underused, Gideon said. See, could support a shared transport arrangement if we organized it right. See, and accounts need to be kept, she said. Transparent ones. See, public record. He looked at her. You'd do the accounts. See, it wasn't quite a question. She looked back at him. See, yes. He nodded. He picked up his coffee and held it. See, outside the argument in the yard had resolved into laughter. She could hear it clearly through the window. All 4 voices, the older 2 and the younger 2. See, something that would have been impossible to predict the morning she stood at Ironwood's gate. See, she sat with that for a moment. The sound of it, the specific, undeniable reality of it. See, Gideon was looking at the window, listening to the same thing. See, Owen used to be quieter, he said. Not sadly observationally, but with something under it. See, he had less reason not to be, Clara said. Gideon looked at her. See, she met his gaze and held it. The moment lasted about 4 seconds, which is not very long by most measurements, but is very long by the measurement of things being acknowledged without being said, and then Clara picked up her pen and, see, went back to the letter she was writing to Ferris. See, but she noticed when she looked down at the page that Gideon didn't look away right away. See, she tooed. She noticed it, and she said nothing, and she wrote her letter, and outside the 4 children went on with their noise and their argument and their laughter, and the morning continued. See, and Ironwood stood exactly where it had always stood, only now the ground beneath it felt different. See, not safe. Nothing out here was entirely safe, and she'd stopped expecting it to be. See, but solid, earned, the particular solidity of ground that has been fought for. See, the letter to Ferris took an hour to write properly. See, when she finished it, see, she read it through once. See, folded it, see, and sealed it. See, she wrote the address in the careful hand that Gideon had once compared to a lawyer's and that she thought of as simply clear. See, she wanted people to be able to read it. She wanted people to understand exactly what it said. See, she had learned, over 2 months at a nearly failed ranch, at the edge of a settlement that had been quietly suffering for years, that clarity was not a simple thing. See, it was something you built carefully, from evidence and documentation, and the willingness to say what you saw without softening it into something more comfortable. See, it was, she thought, the most useful thing she knew how to do. See, she put the letter in her coat pocket to be posted and went to see about lunch. See, Ferris wrote back in 10 days. Clara read the letter at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning in late November, with snow coming down outside in the quiet, purposeful way of snow that intends to stay. See, she read it once quickly to get the shape of it. See, then she read it again slowly, because the shape of it was large enough that she wanted to be sure she had it right before she said anything to anyone. See, Ferris had filed. Not just a response to the foreclosure, a formal complaint with the territorial court on behalf of multiple parties. See, citing the documentation Clara had sent and the additional records that Harlan and Calloway and 3 other ranchers had since provided. See, the complaint named Slade's exchange operation specifically. See, it named Decker's statement specifically. It named, in the careful language of legal documents, a pattern of fraud affecting no fewer than 7 properties over a period of 8 years. See, 7 properties, 8 years. She set the letter down. See, she had known the numbers were bad. She had spent weeks with the numbers. See, but seeing them assembled, formally named, dated, totaled, produced a feeling that was distinct from the analytical process of building the case. See, it was the feeling of understanding the full size of something you'd only been able to see in pieces before. See, 7 families, 8 years of self-doubt, of working harder and falling further behind, of men like Harlan standing in back rooms questioning their own tallies. See, of women like Mrs. Grantley watching their operations shrink and wondering what they'd done wrong. See, Clara folded the letter carefully. She put it in the box. See, then she went to find Gideon. He was in the barn with the cast on his arm and hay in his hair, doing something with the feed storage that Pete had been doing adequately without him, but that Gideon had apparently decided needed his specific oversight. See, she stood in the barn doorway for a moment. He didn't hear her over the sounds of the horses and the wind at the roof. See, she said his name. He turned. He looked at her face and immediately set down what he was holding. See, what happened? She handed him the letter. He read it. See, she watched him read it, the way his jaw tightened partway through, the particular stillness that came over him near the end. See, he turned the page and read the second side and then stood holding it. See, 7 properties, he said. Yes, 8 years. He looked up. See, I've known some of these people for 8 years, Clara. See, he stopped. Something moved through his face. See, Harlan lost his ranch 3 years ago. He's been working at the mill. See, if someone had. No, she said. He looked at the letter again. See, then he looked at her. How long did Ferris say the investigation would take? See, he says the court can move to freeze Slade's assets pending the full investigation within 30 days, if the evidentiary threshold is met. See, he believes it is met. She paused. The foreclosure suspension stays in place throughout. See, Gideon let out a long breath. Not a relieved sound, more like a man releasing something he'd been holding for a very long time without fully realizing how long. See, what do we do in the meantime? We keep running the ranch, she said. See, and we give Ferris whatever he asks for. He nodded. See, he handed the letter back. Their hands overlapped briefly on the paper. His larger, rougher, the cast making his grip asymmetric, and he didn't pull away immediately, and neither did she. See, a moment that lasted about as long as the one in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, and then it passed, and she put the letter back in her coat and went inside. See, December came. Not gently. The frontier was not gentle with December, and this one arrived with the specific intention of the ones that precede hard winters, cold that had gravity to it, ice on the water troughs by morning. See, the cattle huddled in the arrangements that suggested they understood something was coming and were preparing accordingly. See, Clara had been preparing for it since September. The root cellar was as stocked as she could make it. See, the wood was split and stacked. The garden had given everything it had, and she had preserved every bit of that everything. See, the house had been gone over, corner by corner, for gaps and drafts. The loose board on the porch was finally fixed. The window in the room she shared with Maisie had new caulking. The gap under the kitchen door was no longer a gap. See, she made a list one evening of everything she'd done to the house since March. See, it covered 2 pages. She looked at it and then put it away because making lists of accomplished things was less useful than making lists of things still to do, and there were always things still to do. See, the children had found their winter rhythms. See, Elias was, by December, a ranch hand in any practical sense. Pete had started consulting him on fence decisions, which Pete would not have done with someone he considered a boy, and Pete's opinion of people was not generously distributed. See, Elias was also taller than he'd been in March by what Clara estimated was nearly 2 inches. See, and he'd filled out in the way of a boy who has been doing physical work consistently and has started to become someone other than his mother's son to the people around him. See, she watched him one afternoon from the kitchen window, him and Owen and Pete working the near fence line, and Owen watching Elias with the same expression Owen had worn in those early weeks when he'd been quietly teaching Elias fence work. See, except now the direction of learning had reversed, or maybe that wasn't quite right either. Maybe it was more accurate to say they were teaching each other. See, the way 2 people will do when they have decided they trust each other without making a formal agreement about it. See, Ruth and Maisie remained in the specific orbit of each other that had established itself in the first week. See, they argued with the fluency of sisters about who had done more chores, about whose turn it was with the one decent pair of warm indoor socks, about the correct way to tell a particular story they had both heard differently. See, they also defended each other with the completeness of sisters. See, which Clara had witnessed once, when a boy in town said something careless about Maisie's coat, and Ruth had turned to face him with the expression of someone significantly older and more dangerous than 8 years old. See, Gideon had told Clara about that incident. He'd been there. See, she'd said, "Good for Ruth." He'd said, "That's more or less what I thought." See, the investigation moved forward with the speed of official processes, which is to say, slowly in ways that required patience of everyone involved. See, Ferris sent updates. Harlan came to Ironwood twice in December to review documents and discuss what the court was asking for. See, the second time he came, he sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the business was finished, with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. See, I keep thinking about Decker, he said, the weight man. See, I saw that man 100 times, at every sale, standing there with his clipboard. See, and I doubted myself. Clara sat across from him. She let him say it. See, he was just so sure, Harlan said, the way he wrote things down. See, official. Like the number was the number because he wrote it. He shook his head. See, I can't get back 3 years. No, Clara said, but you've got however many years are coming. See, he looked at her. Is that supposed to make it better? See, no, she said honestly, it's supposed to be true. See, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, how did you know? When you found the ledgers, how did you know it wasn't just records being records, numbers being off the way numbers are? See, she thought about it. Because the error always went the same direction, she said. See, mistakes are random. A scale that's slightly off will read wrong in both directions sometimes. See, Slade's records only ever read wrong in the direction that cost you money and made him money. See, every time. Over 4 years, she paused. There's only one explanation for a pattern like that. See, Harlan stared at his cold coffee. I knew it, he said quietly. See, deep down I knew it and I talked myself out of it. See, she understood that too. See, the way a person can see something clearly and then let the weight of someone else's authority, their official records, their professional manner, their position in the hierarchy of the place press down on the clear sight until it clouds over. See, she'd done a version of it herself in the last year of the farm. See, trusted the bank's assessment of her situation over her own assessment right up until the moment the bank's assessment became the floor dropping away. See, you're not talking yourself out of it anymore, she said. See, Harlan looked up. Something in his face settled, not healed, not resolved, but settled in the direction of a man who has decided to stop arguing with what he knows. See, he came back a third time, 2 days before Christmas, with Ed Calloway and a man named Briggs who ran a small sheep operation and had been at the outer edge of the conversations in town. See, Briggs was not a talker. He sat at the table and drank his coffee and listened while Harlan and Calloway laid out the cooperative idea that Clara and Gideon had been quietly developing since November. See, the structure was straightforward in the way that good structures are, a shared livestock market, owned collectively by the member ranchers, with transport arrangements on a rotation, see, weighing done in the presence of 2 witnesses from the membership, and accounts kept publicly written in a ledger that any member could request to examine at any time. See, Clara had written out the proposed terms. She slid the paper across the table when they'd been talking long enough that the idea had been said in every possible informal way, and it was time for it to become a document. See, Harlan read it. Calloway read it. Briggs picked it up, read it in about 45 seconds with the speed of someone who reads contracts regularly and knows what to look for, and set it back down. See, accounts kept by who? Briggs said, me, Clara said. See, he looked at her. You're a woman. I'm aware of that, she said. See, I'm also the person who found the evidence that's currently being reviewed by the territorial court. See, which required keeping accounts. He looked at her for another moment. See, then he looked at Gideon. Gideon was sitting at the end of the table and had the expression of a man watching a question be asked that he considers already answered. See, she keeps the accounts, Gideon said. Briggs looked back at Clara. See, and they're public. Anyone can check them. Anyone can check them, she said. See, that's the point. He nodded once, decisively, the way Calloway had nodded on the road. See, the weight of a decision that had been coming for longer than the conversation. See, I'm in, Briggs said. They worked through the details until the afternoon light started going and Clara lit the lamps. See, when the 3 men left Harlan last, buttoning his coat at the door, he paused and looked at her. See your husband, he said carefully. He was a lucky man. See, Clara considered how to receive that. He was a good man, she said. See, that's different. Harlan nodded like he understood the distinction. See, then he went out into the cold. Gideon closed the door behind him. See, he stood in the entryway for a moment. Briggs's opinion matters in this territory, he said. See, more than he shows. People watch which direction he goes before they decide. See, I know, Clara said. She was already clearing the table. See, that's why I let Harlan and Calloway do most of the talking and let him sit with it. See, Gideon turned to look at her. You let them do the talking. See, people believe something more when they feel they arrived at it, she said. See, not when someone handed it to them. He stood in the entryway and looked at her for a long moment. See, she kept clearing the table. After a moment, she heard him move, not toward the back of the house as he usually did in the evenings, but toward the table. See, he sat down. She set the cups in the basin and turned and looked at him. See, say what you're going to say, she said. He looked at his hands on the table. See, his cast was due to come off in 2 weeks, and he'd been managing without it in ways the doctor had specifically told him not to, and the knuckles of his right hand had a scrape on them that she'd noticed 3 days ago and had not commented on. See, I don't know how to say it without it sounding. He stopped. See, try, she said. He looked up. I've been thinking about the gate, he said. See, the morning you came, she waited. I almost didn't open it, he said. See, she looked at him. That surprised her, or not surprised exactly, but she hadn't known it. See, what stopped you from not opening it? He was quiet for a moment. See, Maisie, he said. The way she was standing, she wasn't crying. See, she was just braced, like she'd learned to take whatever was coming without making a scene of it. He paused. See, I knew that look. Ruth had that look for about a year after Anne died. See, Clara said nothing. The fire was low, and neither of them moved to add wood. See, I think I thought I was doing a decent thing, he said. See, letting you in. I thought I was helping. He stopped again. See, looked at the table. I didn't think much about what was actually happening. See, which was that 3 people I knew nothing about were going to change everything. See, we needed shelter, Clara said carefully. I know what you needed. He met her eyes. See, I'm saying what I got, which was considerably more than I understood I was getting. He paused. See, and I don't just mean the accounts and the butter money and the evidence against Slade. He said it all in one breath, like he'd been holding it at that length for a while. See, Clara sat down across from him. She was quiet for a moment. See, Gideon, she said, I need you to know something. See, he waited. When I walked through that gate, I was not. She chose the words with the same care she chose words for legal documents. I was not looking for anything except shelter for my children. See, I was not looking for another situation to manage. See, I was not looking for a person to fix or a problem to solve, or she stopped. See, I know that, he said. I'm saying it because I want to be honest about where I started, she said. See, I started needing something. And what happened after that was not what I planned, because I had no plan beyond the next week. She looked at the table. See, but somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere between the ledgers and the blizzard and the butter sales, this stopped being somewhere I was staying and became somewhere I was. See, he looked at her. That's different, she said, from what I came in with. See, is it stopped? Tried again. Is it enough to stay? Past the investigation, past Slade, past all of it. See, just here, this place, and he didn't finish the sentence. See, he let it hang there, which was a thing he did, sometimes when the ending of a sentence was something the other person needed to supply. See, Clara looked at him across the kitchen table that she had cleaned and reorganized and worked at every morning for 9 months. See, she looked at the house around them, the repaired porch board, the caulked window, the organized larder, the 4 pairs of children's boots by the back door that were now mixed together in a way that had stopped having any discernible order weeks ago. See, yes, she said. It's enough. He exhaled, a quiet sound, but with the quality of something that had been held for a long time. See, they didn't say anything else about it that night. See, they didn't need to. Some things you say once and then let stand. See, Christmas at Ironwood was the first one Clara had managed in 3 years that felt like something other than a thing to be gotten through. See, the house had noise and food and a tree that Elias and Owen had argued about the selection of for 40 minutes before agreeing on one that pleased nobody perfectly and that Clara privately thought was the best possible outcome. See, Ruth made decorations from scraps of cloth. Maisie made something with dried seed pods that she described as ornaments and that Clara received with total sincerity. See, Gideon gave Elias his old hunting knife, wrapped in cloth, presented with the minimum of ceremony. See, Elias looked at it for a moment with the face of a boy who is trying not to show how much something means to him and is not entirely succeeding. See, my father gave me that, Gideon said. Figure it should go to someone who'll use it. See, Elias looked up at him. He didn't say a lot. But what he said, thank you, sir, he said with a weight that suggested it was standing in for several other things he was not currently equipped to articulate. See, Clara watched that exchange from across the room and felt something move through her that she recognized, now as the particular emotion of a mother watching her son receive something she couldn't give him. See, not replacement. Thomas was irreplaceable, and Elias knew it, and Gideon wasn't trying. See, it was something different, the acknowledgement of what was present, not the erasure of what was absent. See, she'd been afraid of that distinction once. She was less afraid of it now. See, January brought the court's decision. Ferris's letter arrived on a Thursday. Everything significant seemed to arrive on Thursdays, which Clara eventually decided was coincidence, but which felt, in the moment, like a pattern. See, she read it at the table as she'd read the others. See, then she set it down and pressed both hands flat against the surface and took 3 steady breaths. See, Slade's assets had been frozen pending full investigation. See, the livestock exchange was under direct court oversight. See, a financial examiner had been appointed to review all outstanding notes issued by Slade's lending operation. See, where debt calculations were found to be fraudulent, they would be adjusted to reflect actual legitimate amounts owed. See, adjusted. The word sat there on the page with enormous quiet implications. See, when Gideon read it, he sat for a long time without speaking. See, then he said, "What does adjusted mean, for us, specifically?" See, it means a court examiner will look at every transaction between you and Slade over 4 years, Clara said. See, and calculate what you actually owed at the agreed interest rate with the correct weights applied. See, and the difference between that number and the number Slade was claiming will be, she paused, either deducted from any remaining legitimate debt, or if the fraud overcharges exceed what's owed, potentially returned. See, Gideon was very still, returned. "It's possible," she said carefully. "See, I don't know the exact number yet. Ferris is going to work with the examiner." See, he stood up from the table and walked to the window and stood there for a moment with his back to her. See, she let him have the moment. See, she understood what was happening. Not just the financial mathematics of it, but the larger reckoning of a man who had spent 4 years believing the problem was his, who had been paying a debt that was in significant part invented. See, who had quietly stripped his herd and his resources and his household down to bare function, trying to service an obligation that had been rigged against him from the beginning. See, when he turned around, his eyes were dry, but something in his face was not quite assembled. See, for 4 years, he said, I thought I was failing. See, Clara looked at him. I know. I worked harder and it kept getting worse and I thought he stopped. See, I told Owen this place might not make it. Owen is 11, she said. See, he'll revise. Gideon shook his head, not dismissing it, something else. See, working through it, I can't get those years back either. See, no, she let that sit. Then she said, but you're going to be able to tell your son that his father held on. See, through 4 years of that, he held on. And when someone walked through the gate who could help him see it clearly, he let her. See, Gideon looked at her for a long moment. That's a generous version, he said. See, it's the true version, she said. Generous and true aren't the same thing. See, he came back to the table. He sat down. He looked at the letter and at the box and at the accumulated months of documentation that had begun, with her sitting on the floor of his front room with 3 ledgers open and a cold feeling in her chest. See, I want to do something, he said. For Harlan. She looked at him. See, his ranch is gone. The court process might get him some adjustment on the debt he had, but the land was already sold off. Gideon paused. See, I have the east grazing land. More than I can work efficiently, even with the full herd. See, I want to offer him something, a lease arrangement, something real, with terms that give him a chance to rebuild. He stopped. See, looked at her. Is that yes, she said, before he could qualify it or second-guess it. See, that's exactly right. He nodded. He looked slightly relieved, which she found interesting, that he'd been uncertain whether she'd agree. See, she stored that away as information about how he saw her, which was useful. See, the cooperative needs a central location for the way station, she said. See, the east land would work for that too. It would give Harlan's operation a practical reason to be adjacent. See, Gideon looked at her. You already thought about this. See, I thought about it, she said, but it needed to be your idea. See, he made the sound that was almost a laugh, a little more complete this time. See, you're doing it again. What? Letting someone arrive at something. See, she met his eyes. Did it work? See, he looked at her for a moment with the full, unguarded attention that he'd been gradually extending over months. No longer just in the late evenings, no longer only when he was tired enough to forget to maintain the careful distance. See, yes, he said, it worked. The spring that came to Red Hollow that year came slowly, the way it always does in that country, advancing and retreating, cold returning just when the warmth had started to feel reliable. But it came. See, by March the ground was workable. By April the cattle were on better grass than they'd had in years. See, by May the garden was planted, a larger garden this time, because Clara had expanded it in the fall with full intention of expanding it again in the spring, and she'd brought Harlan's wife to the preservation arrangement as a second producer, see, which gave both households more income and the hotel in the neighboring town a more reliable supply. See, the court process finished in April. The examiner's report ran to 40 pages. See, Clara read all of them. The summary was a number the amount by which Slade's charges had exceeded legitimate debt across his entire lending operation. See, the number covered 9 properties, including Ironwood. See, on 3 of the properties, including Harlan's, the fraudulent overcharges exceeded the actual original debt by amounts that meant those ranchers had, in a real financial sense, see, already paid off what they genuinely owed and had continued paying beyond that into pure extraction. See, Harlan had owned his ranch free and clear by the actual mathematics of it. See, he'd lost it to a debt that didn't legitimately exist. See, Clara sat with that knowledge for a long evening. Then she picked up her pen and helped Ferris write the filing that would seek recovery of assets on Harlan's behalf. See, Slade did not go quietly. See, this was the part that Clara had told Gideon would happen, that a man with resources and lawyers and 15 years of practiced maneuvering does not accept the conclusion of a court process without deploying everything he has in the other direction. See, he filed appeals. He contested the examiner's methodology. See, his lawyers argued about the evidentiary weight of a former employee's statement. See, they argued about Clara's notebooks, their informal nature, their origin, the question of who had authorized a hired housekeeper to examine a rancher's private accounts. See, that last argument was the one Clara found most instructive. See, the characterization of her hired housekeeper, private accounts, as though her role was the issue rather than what the accounts contained, was Slade's tell. See, it was what powerful men did when they were cornered by someone they'd dismissed. They tried to reestablish the categories. See, to put things back in their proper boxes. The territorial court declined to revisit the evidentiary standard. See, Decker's statement held, the pattern held, the 7, eventually 9 sets of corroborating rancher records held. See, in June, Slade's appeals were denied. In July, his assets were liquidated to satisfy the court's findings. See, the livestock exchange passed to a court-appointed administrator who was tasked with operating it under the transparency requirements Clara had outlined in the cooperative proposal. Because the cooperative proposal had, somewhere in the spring, see, become part of the court's remedy framework when Ferris had presented it as an alternative operating structure. See, the cooperative's first official meeting was held in a barn on the east edge of Ironwood's property on a warm evening in August. See, 14 ranchers came. Clara ran the accounts meeting. See, Gideon chaired the operational discussion. See, Harlan, who had been offered and had accepted the lease arrangement on the east grazing land and had begun rebuilding his herd with the partial recovery the court had awarded him, spoke about the transport rotation. See, Briggs, who turned out to be exactly as influential as Gideon had said, had already spoken to 6 ranchers who hadn't been at the first conversation, and all 6 of them were at the August meeting. See, Calloway brought his records to show as an example of what the new documentation standard would look like. See, he'd been keeping them meticulously since November, signed and dated and witnessed. See, and he put them on the table in the middle of the meeting with a particular satisfaction on his face that had not been there in October when he'd told Clara about his wife, and the 3 years he'd spent thinking the problem was him. See, Clara watched the room during that meeting. The 14 ranchers' men who had largely not talked to each other about the specifics of their financial situations before last winter, see, who had each been isolated in the private difficulty of it, talking through the cooperative structure with the particular energy of people who have been carrying something alone and have just discovered the weight is divisible. See, it was not a perfect meeting. There were disagreements about the transport rotation and one extended argument about the way station location that resolved only when Pete, who had come along and was sitting in the back row saying nothing, pointed out a practical logistical problem with both proposed locations that neither arguing party had considered, and the argument collapsed into embarrassed agreement. Gideon caught Clara's eye across the room after Pete's intervention. She looked back at him. The almost smile completed itself entirely, finally, without the holding back. She looked away before she smiled herself, but only just. August became September. One evening toward the end of it, a warm evening, the particular warmth of the summer's last argument before fall took over. Clara went to look at the vegetable garden. What she'd planted in desperate necessity in March of last year had become, over 18 months, something she was actually proud of. 2 long rows of turnips that had come in strong, tomatoes that had exceeded every expectation. Beans dried and stored and enough over for the hotel account. Winter squash that she and Ruth had counted the week before with the satisfaction of people for whom counting large numbers of vegetables is a genuine pleasure. She was standing there with her hands in the pockets of her coat, the coat that had been mended so many times, but that she'd kept because mending things, rather than replacing them, was still a reflex she respected. Even when replacing was now within reach, when she heard steps behind her. She didn't turn around. She knew the weight of the step. Gideon came and stood beside her. He looked at the garden. That was bare ground 18 months ago, he said. There were some old seeds, she said. Not this many. She looked at the rows. I added to it every time there was something to add. He was quiet for a moment. The light was the long gold light of September evenings that makes everything look briefly like it has been resolved. I remember the first time I saw you in the kitchen, he said. You'd been here one night, and you just opened the larder and stood there looking at it. I was taking stock. I know that now. At the time I thought I didn't know what you were doing. She looked at him sideways. What did you think I was doing? He considered. Deciding, he said. I thought you were deciding something. I was, she said. Whether the situation was workable. And I decided it was. She paused. I was wrong about some of it. I thought it would take longer to find the problems. I didn't expect Slade to move when he did. I didn't expect the blizzard. Nobody expected the blizzard. I should have planned better for it. He turned to look at her. You went into it to find me. That was not a plan, she said. That was necessity. Clara. He said her name the way he had on the porch that morning when Slade came the quiet authority of it. She turned to look at him. Stop calculating for a minute, he said. She looked at him. Just stop, he said, not unkindly. With the ease of a man who had learned her well enough to know what he was asking. She let herself stop. Just for a moment. The garden, the evening light, the sounds of the house behind them, all 4 children were inside. She could hear them, the particular texture of noise that 4 children in a kitchen at supper-time produce. Argument and laughter indistinguishable at this distance. I'm not good at stopping, she said. I know that about you. It doesn't drive you. Sometimes, he said honestly. Sometimes it drives me to distraction. He paused. Then I think about what would have happened if you'd been less calculating about everything, and I stopped being driven to distraction. She looked at the garden for a moment. Maisie's happy, she said. It came out without full intention, just a fact that was present in her and needed to be said. I don't think I understood how unhappy she was before. She had good days, but she was braced, the way you described. All the time braced. She's not braced anymore, Gideon said. No. The feeling that moved through her at that was the same one she'd had watching Ruth give Maisie the cornbread on the first night gratitude, adjacent to grief, the two of them so close together they could barely be told apart. She's not. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to ask you something. She waited. I'm not going to say it gracefully, he said. See, I want to tell you that in advance. That's all right. See, he turned to face her directly. He had his hat in his hands. He'd taken it off without her noticing, and he was doing something with the brim. The fidgeting of a man who is normally still and is currently not. See, I want you to stay, he said. Not the way it started. See, not as something practical, as he stopped. I want you to be here because it's yours. See, all of it. The house and the land and the 4 ridiculous children and Pete and the new accounts, Ledger and me. He stopped again. See, the hat was getting a thorough treatment, specifically me. See, Clara looked at him. She thought about the gate, the gray timber and the broken hinge and the sign in letters the color of ash. See, she thought about standing at that gate with 63 cents and a cast iron skillet and a battered trunk and 2 children who were holding themselves very still against the coming of whatever came next. See, she thought about what she'd been looking for. Shelter. See, just shelter. Nothing beyond the next week. She thought about what she'd found instead. Not handed to her, not given, not rescued into. See, found the way you find something when you're paying close enough attention to what's actually in front of you. See, you're right, she said. It wasn't graceful. He looked at her, the slight tension of a man waiting. See, yes, she said. The word was simple and total, and she meant it the way she'd meant the no she'd said to Maisie in the kitchen during the blizzard. Not hoping, not performing, but deciding. See, the kind of yes that is a direction rather than an answer. See, he exhaled, put his hat back on with slightly less coordination than usual. See, she looked away so he could have that. They stood in the garden for a while longer, in the September light, in the particular quiet of a place that has been fought for and is still standing. See, not perfect. The fence on the east side still needed work, and there was a drainage issue in the root cellar she'd been meaning to address properly since spring. See, and the cooperative's second official meeting had already revealed that Briggs and Calloway were going to be constitutionally incapable of agreeing on transport schedules without significant intervention. See, there was always something. That was not a complaint. See, that was what it meant to be somewhere real rather than somewhere temporary. See, the gate that had once hung at its broken angle was fixed now. Elias had fixed it in May as a project he hadn't asked permission for, and it swung clean and level and closed properly against the post. See, Clara had noticed it the morning after he'd done it and hadn't said anything about it, because some things didn't need comment. See, it's still opened for anyone who came to it the way people came to Ironwood, looking for something at the end of a road that had stopped offering alternatives. See, she knew what that felt like from both sides now. See, Red Hollow changed. The way small places change when a thing that had been holding them back is removed. Not all at once, not completely, but gradually and then more quickly, the way the spring had come that year. See, the cooperative's transparent pricing lifted income across properties that had been quietly deflated for nearly a decade. See, 3 ranches that had been on the edge of failure stabilized. See, Harlan rebuilt. Mrs. Grantley, the widow on the North Road with 8 years of grievance against Slade's pricing, see, turned out to have a head for livestock management that the cooperative benefited from considerably once she was given a reason to apply it outward instead of just surviving. See, Clara kept the accounts. Every transaction, every weight. See, every payment recorded in the clear hand that Gideon had once compared to a lawyer's, and that she thought of as simply what happened when you'd spent enough years needing people to be able to read your numbers and trust them. See, any member could ask to see the books at any time. See, several had. The asking and the transparency were the point. See, she was at the desk one winter evening, the following winter, a year after the blizzard, going over the quarterly figures with the focused attention that the numbers deserved, when she heard the front door. See, she heard footsteps in the entry, heard Gideon's voice and another voice she recognized, Harlan, stopping by late, which he did sometimes now without it being unusual. See, she heard the specific sounds of the house settling around the people in it, the fire. See, the movement in the upper rooms, that was the children doing whatever the children were doing at this hour, which probably involved something that would need to be addressed in the morning. See, she set down her pen for a moment. She looked at the desk. See, at the ledger open in front of her, and the organized box beside it, and the corner of the room where the lean-to door was visible, where she'd first found the tin box with the note agreement, the first piece of evidence. See, the thing that had let her see the shape of what was wrong. See, she thought briefly about who she had been when she walked through that gate. See, the exhaustion of it. The weight of having already lost so much that losing again had become something she was simply preparing for continuously, as a state of being rather than an event. See, she was not that woman anymore. Not entirely. Some of it stayed the vigilance, the habit of documentation, the reflex toward worst-case arithmetic those didn't leave, and she didn't particularly want them to. See, they were not flaws. They were how she'd survived, and they were how she'd fought, and they had protected more than just herself. See, but the bracing was gone, the permanent readiness for the floor to drop. See, she noticed its absence the way you notice a sound that has stopped, not immediately, but gradually in the quiet left behind. See, she picked up her pen, she finished the quarterly figures. See, then she closed the ledger and put her pen away and went to see who was in the kitchen. See, Harlan was at the table with his coat still on, drinking coffee and looking more like himself than he'd looked in 3 years, which was an observation Clara had been making quietly for months. See, Gideon was across from him. They'd been talking before she came in and paused when she entered, not hiding anything, just the natural pause of a conversation that had found a good place to breathe. See, evening, Harlan said. Evening. She poured herself coffee and sat down. See, they talked for a while about the spring cattle arrangements and about a rancher 3 territories over who'd been asking about the cooperative model and whether it could be replicated elsewhere. See, Harlan thought yes. Gideon thought probably with modifications. See, Clara thought they should write down exactly what they'd built before they started advising anyone else on how to build it, so that what got passed along was the actual thing and not a memory of the actual thing. See, that's very you, Gideon said. I know, she said. See, Harlan looked between them. He smiled, the small, knowing smile of a man who has been watching something from the outside and is content to let it be what it is without commentary. See, he finished his coffee and said good night and pulled on his coat and went out into the cold. See, the house went quiet. Gideon looked at her across the kitchen table. See, 4 years, he said, not continuing a conversation starting one, or returning to one that had never entirely ended, about what the 4 years had cost and what the last 2 years had built on the other side of the cost. See, almost 5, Clara said. She looked at him. For you. See, he nodded. For me. She looked at the table. At the surface of it, the scrubbed wood, the old marks from before she came, the newer marks from all the work that had happened on it since. See, the ledgers, the documents, the Christmas meals, the 4 children's elbows, and the coffee cups of every conversation about every practical thing that had happened in this kitchen. See, do you think started? Stopped. Tried again. Was it worth it, the 4 years? See, even knowing what it was. Clara considered the question seriously because it deserved that. See, those 4 years made you who you are when I walked through that gate, she said. See, the man who left food for the Emery family when he could barely feed his own. See, who held on when everyone expected him not to. Who opened the gate, she paused. See, I don't know if worth it is the right frame. But I know that what came out of it, what we built from it, that's real. See, that's not nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. See, no, he said, it's not nothing. Outside, the winter dark was complete, and the stars over the frontier were the particular stars of clear, cold nights, hard and far and very bright. See, the gate at the edge of the property stood level on its repaired hinge, closed now but operable. See, it would open again for the next person who came down that road looking for what Clara had been looking for. Not rescue, not perfection, just a door that didn't close before they could get their strength back. See, that was all it had ever needed to be. And sometimes, when that is the thing you offer, it turns out to be the thing that saves everything.